If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who drive overnight, spend long hours on the road, or go on lengthy road trips, have you ever encountered a cryptid, creature, or anything paranormal that freaked you out?
Strange encounter on the road, Spain. Location: near La Carlota, Córdoba, Spain. Rafael Diaz and Antonio Gomez Sanchez were traveling on a road toward Córdoba when they noticed that they had a flat tire. They both exited the vehicle and, using the light of a cell phone, began walking towards the nearest mile marker in order to call a tow truck. Suddenly, they see walking in the middle of the road a man-like figure more than 2 meters in height wearing a sort of tunic-like garment that covered its body completely. They were not able to distinguish any legs, arms, or neck as the figure seemed to actually float right above the asphalt instead of truly walking. As the figure approached the two stunned witnesses, it stopped in front of them, remaining still and ignoring the witnesses' questions. The light of their cell phone seemed to melt into the figure's garment. One of the witnesses seemed to become paralyzed in front of the figure until his companion shook him into reality, and both then ran towards their vehicle, followed by the strange entity. They both entered their vehicle and drove with their flat tire to the nearest gas station. One of the witnesses suffered a nervous breakdown and remained locked in his house for a week after the encounter. I thought it was a tree, but it wasn't a tree. Flying humanoid. I was a third shifter in Wisconsin, US, around 2014, who lived about 20 minutes from my workplace in the county. As I was pulling up into the section of country road that immediately led into the city, I saw, probably the strangest sight I have ever witnessed in my life, and I cannot explain it. It was twilight, almost evening, and so the trees were all black against the dark blue sky, right? And I simply happened to glance up at the top of one of the trees as I was driving, and what I originally thought was the top of the tree flew up into the air at lightning speed and disappeared. It looked like a humanoid thing with wings, but it was so fast I could barely make out anything else. But it definitely had legs and wings. It just lifted up. The figure with wings that I thought was the top of the tree just flew up and disappeared. Lightning fast. I've never seen anything fly that fast. It was like a blink. I remember stopping my car outside of my workplace and just sitting there and thinking about what I just saw and wondering if I was crazy or if I imagined it. I decided not to tell my coworkers or anybody ever except until now because it's been 10 years. I saw Bigfoot. I saw a Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it, about 15 years ago. I was with a friend, and we were driving around Slidell, Louisiana. We weren't from this area. Somehow we got lost and ended up driving through a rural area that had a lot of woods. I was in the passenger seat. I noticed something up ahead walking along the side of the road just like a person would. It was walking with the flow of traffic, so we were behind it, and I was looking at the back of it. It was dark and sort of thin and covered with fur. It wasn't stocky like a gorilla. It was tall, like 7 or 8 feet tall. As we passed it, it was literally 3 or 4 feet from me, I would guess. I asked my friend what the hell we just saw, and I asked him if he wanted to go back to see. We agreed not to. It scared the shit out of me. I know it sounds crazy. I never really believed in anything like this before. I'm afraid of the woods now. I just wanted to share what happened and wanted to know if anyone else experienced anything similar. Unexplained sighting. Werewolf/dogman sighting. Let me start off by saying I do not understand what I saw, nor do I have any reason or desire to just make up such a story because I wish I hadn't seen it. This took place on March 8, 1993, around 11 p.m. I was able to do so because it coincided with a full moon event, which everyone was aware of and talking about at the time. The moon was very full and very bright that night. It took place in Rembert, South Carolina, a very small rural town, what we call in the South a two-stoplight town. Myself, along with my stepdad, my mom, and my sister, all witnessed this being. We were heading back from Columbia after visiting family. We took a shortcut back to Sumter, where we lived, through Rembert. My stepdad was driving after getting off I-77 from Columbia onto 378 into Rembert. We were abruptly stopped by a small red car that was abandoned in the middle of the road with all 4 doors open with no driver or passengers in sight. We were all alarmed by this and urged my stepdad not to stop because we didn't know if it was a trap to rob people, etc. So as my stepdad slowly edged around the vehicle, this being approached our vehicle, it came from the direction that would be considered town. In my estimation it was probably 10 plus feet tall. It reminded me of how I visited NY for the first time, looking at all the skyscrapers and having to really turn my head to the side and peer straight up to see the buildings to view the city fully. It was completely covered in all black fur. It was standing and walking upright like a human. It had very long, sharp nails. It was kind of snarling, so we could see it had very sharp teeth, but most shockingly, it had glowing green eyes. I mean glowing, unlike anything I have ever seen in my whole existence. All I can compare it to my understanding, would be a werewolf. The kind you see people transform into in all the horror movies growing up, but more realistic, more frightening. It was a living, breathing monster in the flesh. It still sends chills down my spine even as I type this. 28 years later. As it passed our vehicle that was stopped by it crossing our path, we were all in a state of oh my god shock as to what we were witnessing and in a state of disbelief. As it passed around our vehicle, it didn't seem to be interested in any way, only as an obstacle in its way. It was breathing heavily, it almost seemed hypnotized or in sort of a trance. It disappeared on the other side of us into the cornfields off the side of 378, and my stepdad sped off. The sighting was very quick, probably 10 seconds, but it almost seemed like it happened in slow motion, if that even makes sense. We rarely spoke of it over the years, but we were all certain and were in agreement that it wasn't something from this world. We felt it was otherworldly, not sure if the moon had anything to do with the sighting other than knowing the cliché that werewolves come out at night on a full moon. My mother and sister have since passed away. I think from time to time to bring it up to my stepdad or ask him about it to see if he remembers it. Which I'm sure he does. I have been hesitant but have shared with select people over the years. I know it is viewed as crazy or something that people make up because it is outside of our understanding and it conflicts with our views and beliefs. This sighting has stuck with me, and it will randomly pop into my head out of nowhere. I still wonder if it did something to the people that were in that red car. Were we the only people who witnessed this thing? As a 13-year-old, I don't remember any headlines from this. I wish I had done more research afterwards. No one believes me, but this road is truly haunted. I am a 19-year-old female who resides in a small town located in the middle of Minnesota. I've always had a love for anything paranormal and scary. That was until this experience. When I was 16, it was the height of COVID, and the kids in my town would do anything to keep ourselves entertained. I had just gotten my driver's license and just wanted to drive and get out of the house. Me and my friends had heard about this road near our town that was haunted, but we never believed it. We thought it was a hoax and a way to scare away from the people that lived on the road. So me and my friends decided that we would go and see what it was all about. When nothing happened, it kind of became something we would do when we were bored. That was until a recent visit. My best friend's boyfriend offered to drive her and me out there because neither of them had ever been. But when we got out there, everything felt totally different. From the start, there was a weird smell, almost like the scent of death. We brushed it off, thinking that it may have been something else. Then we got to the part where there's an arch that says Timberlake property. The dog in the car started barking uncontrollably. Like she saw something we didn't. My best friend put her head between her knees because she felt sick. We kept driving, and I saw something. It didn't look right. It looked like a woman, but not at the same time. As we got closer, I realized that the woman had no face. I asked if anyone else could see it, and no one else could, except for the dog, who started barking again, this time more aggressively. I told the driver to step on it and get us out of there. When we finally got back to my house, we noticed handprints all over the windows and doors. But ever since then, things haven't been quite right. I have no idea what I saw that night, but I think whatever it was, it definitely followed me back. When I get home, things will be moved out of place, lights will be on, and I always turn them off, and worst of all, my roommate's dog, who used to love spending time with me in my space, will go nowhere near me or my space. Someone please believe me. I don't know what's going on or how to get rid of it. Last year, my mom called me panicked about what she just saw when driving home. To this day, nobody has an answer, and I'm curious if anybody has an idea. She was driving on the highway, between two small towns where most of the drive consists of farmland and patches of wooded area. What she described was a skinny dog-like creature standing on its hind legs. However, that's not what makes it weird. Its legs were bending backwards. When it noticed the car, she watched it grab the deer carcass on the road and drag it off the side and into the wooded area. I've tried finding similar stories, but the closest thing I found was the Dogman in Michigan. However, it didn't have backwards hind legs, and we live in Missouri, so that hypothesis went out the door. Anyone have ideas or similar experiences? I need help explaining something strange I saw. So for context, I live in rural Indiana on a gravel road that's surrounded by cornfields. We see lots of deer and other wildlife around the area. Last night at around 9:45, I was turning on my road, and my headlights illuminated a pitch-black, tall figure in the middle of the road. This figure was taller than the corn. For comparison, the corn comes up halfway to my face, so around my nose. I'm 6 feet 1 inch. However, this figure must be at least 6 feet 8 inches minus 7. My headlights are extremely bright, most of the time people think I have my high beams on when I don't. And I've seen deer in front of my truck before, even at a far distance away, but they always illuminate as a tan/lighter color. Never pitch black. After a couple of seconds, the figure moved into the ditch on the side of the road, which has tall grass about thigh high. It turns and looks at me, and all of a sudden, the figure is shorter than the corn. And there are lights that bounce off my headlights. It's also now a tan color. This tall, dark figure that I had just seen is now a deer. When I saw this deer, the hairs on my neck stood up, and I got full body chills. Something wasn't right. I drove slowly by where I saw whatever this is, just because if it is a deer, they're sometimes stupid and run back out onto the road. Now that I'm about 10 feet away from this thing, it slowly disappeared into the crops. I quickly drove home and hurried inside, locking all doors because I felt so on edge. I stayed up until about 2 a.m. just thinking about it. What the heck did I see? I'm in rural Indiana, surely there aren't any SWs, abbreviation for a Native American entity, out where I'm at? I really wish I had a dash cam or something to have proof of what I saw. My friend thinks I'm crazy. But it unsettled me so much. And I know what I saw. At least I think I do. If anyone has any potential explanations, please comment. Multiple witnesses, can anyone identify what we saw? Okay, so back in 2012 I was with my at the time age 12 and 13 brothers, one of their friends, my mom, and my dad. We were in the Asheville, North Carolina, area at the Mountain State Fair. As we were headed home, my mom took a back way to avoid traffic that went through a couple neighborhoods. As we were driving, we saw what we thought was a dog in the road, but as we got closer, it turned its head to the right, still sitting in the same spot. It definitely looked like a dog. We came even closer, and as we were right on it, close enough to see the brown fur slightly through the shadow, it stood up and started walking off the road, only to stand up on 2 feet and take a humanoid dog form. The form looked like a dog head with pointed ears and a skin and bone human male-like frame with a tail. We could see its rib outline, and then his stomach area retreating into itself. It was so skinny. It still had dog-like thighs and legs, but its top half was more human, I guess, which is the best description. I thought I was seeing things as they ran off down a neighborhood road. Before I could even say anything, my mom and my brother's friend asked if we saw that, and everyone said yes. We to this day cannot figure out what it was, but the odd thing is, a couple months ago, when the fair was here again, my coworker mentioned they saw this weird animal with a very similar description when leaving the fair, and I told them my family story, and they were freaked out because their sighting matched my description. What could this sighting be? The Forgotten Highway. On New Zealand State Highway 3, you'll encounter a section of that road that goes from Stratford to Taumarunui, two New Zealand towns. On a particular section past the Oura turnoff, is what truckers and commercial drivers like to call what's rumored as the haunted section. Last time I drove this section, it was maybe about 2:30 a.m. There wasn't a single car around, no street lights or nothing. Once you go past the Oura town turnoff, it gets much creepier. I drive a lot around New Zealand, hardly ever this road, however. Usually I would rather take State Highway 1 or 2, however I needed to be back home at a certain time and there was too much traffic on those roads. Some of the things that have been reported after the Oura turnoff that I know of are, the World War I soldier. As you go past this forest, you may notice a World War I soldier standing next to a World War I tank, hiding in the bush. I've heard truck drivers say that as you drive past, his head follows you. Luckily, I haven't encountered this one yet. The next one I know of the 1960s woman standing next to her 1960s Volkswagen Beetle. It's a faded yellow and lying upside down in a ditch on the side of the road. She stands next to it in her dress, which is black and white with flowers on it. People also report that she has palish transparent skin. And like the World War I soldier, she follows you with her head as you drive past. The other one I know of is what we call the black dog, a sort of 2D full black dog. It's got no eyes and a 2D body. If it runs out in front of you from the side of the road, you will hit it. When you hit it, they say it means you will get in a car accident. And the final one I know is the Yeti. I learned from a truck driver in Taupo, New Zealand, that in the early 90s, there were a few kids camping around there. One night they all dressed up as Yetis and walked to the side of the road. And whenever a car came past, they would jump out in front of it. Unfortunately, one of them was hit by a truck, and people still seem to say that his spirit lingers there to this day. This is a creepy story of myself. Recently, I was driving this road in my Saab. As I go past the Oura turnoff, I definitely get the creepy feeling. And as the road got darker, I switched my high beam headlights on. I hadn't seen anything until I got past this teeny little town that had a school called Marco School. As I left this tiny part with about 5 houses, something felt eerie, very airy. I felt as though someone was in the car with me. So I look at my passenger seat, no one's there. I look at my back seat and see the same case. And as I'm looking in my rear view mirror and I looked ahead, the so-called black dog ran out in front of me. I said to myself, what the $K? And I rubbed my eyes. I was very freaked out, so naturally I put my foot down on the gas to leave this road. And I guess that phenomenon was right. A week after that accident, my beloved Saab 93 was brake checked, and I couldn't avoid rear-ending the car. Still scares me driving down that road today. What was it we saw that night? So I am and always have been a huge skeptic and have been advised to share this here as everywhere else. I've either not been believed or it's just been dismissed as something I know it's not. Me and my girlfriend both work at the same place, which is a very old building with a lot of history. Well, since we started working there, quite a few weird and unexplainable things have happened, but as we've never physically seen anything, we have always just dismissed it. We were on our way to work just over a month ago, and driving down the road our work is on, I noticed part of the road in front of some parked cars was strangely dark. I didn't really think anything of it, as it was dark outside anyway, although the streetlights were on, so the road was still well lit. Well, as we approached the area, this whole black mass, I literally don't even know what else I could call it, glided to the left and disappeared into some parked cars. Again, I probably wouldn't have thought much of it and put it down to my eyes playing tricks on me or that I'm just going insane. But then my girlfriend said, "Please tell me you saw that too." That's when I instantly got creeped out, and the more I thought about it, the weirder it became. This black mass was roughly the size of a small grizzly bear, and the edges of it just dispersed into the air like mist. When it moved, it literally glided seamlessly, and it looked like it went into slash through the car. I then realized that you couldn't even see the car behind it. Even the headlights of my girlfriend's car weren't reflecting off the car behind it. It was like it was just absorbing all of the light and was that black. It was literally the absence of light. I would also like to reiterate the fact that it is on a road with a lot of history and was also basically right next to a very old hospital. Although I'm still so skeptical about everything, I don't know if that changes things for me or not. Just to clarify, it was night, so they pulled over in a cornfield to sleep. Dad woke at one point and saw whatever it was staring in at him through the windshield, which was apparently right up on the window looking in at him. He said it was the giant head of a wolf, and its breath was steaming up the window. He screamed, and it took off, running several yards away from them but straight ahead and still in view. His buddy woke up when he screamed, and they both saw it. Dad said it was easily over 8 feet tall and looked just like a tall, skinny werewolf. He mentioned to his buddy that if it were someone in a costume, they would have had to have been very skinny. He said it was standing like a man, and it stood there staring at them for a moment, then took off. They went ahead and drove to his friend's family's place and told them what they saw. They were shocked and said that they had always heard of it but never knew anyone who had seen it. After my dad told me this, which was just a few years ago, I looked it up and discovered the name and its history. I told him, and he couldn't believe there were books and movies about it. He still swears he saw it and that he thinks about it every now and then. He said he even has nightmares about it from time to time. This morning I left the house early, 4:45 a.m. to be exact. I had an early appointment, and I needed to drive about 3 hours to get to my destination. I usually take the main roads, but I decided to take the back roads that drive through an Indian reservation. That road would save me about 45 minutes, and I would have plenty of time when I get to my appointment. I have heard the stories about skinwalkers, and I never thought I would see one. I'm confident that I saw one this morning. I was driving about 60 miles per hour on that reservation road when I came across a herd of horses. I slowed down, thinking that a horse might cross my path, and I might have an accident. I didn't see any other cars on that road. Something caught the corner of my eye. It was something shadowy, and it was moving beside my car. I turned to look at it, and it was just outside of my view, and I looked into the mirror. That's when I saw a face. It looked like an old woman. The face was painted white. The face looked horrible. It was ghastly, very wicked, and ugly looking. I looked away and screamed. I slammed on the gas pedal. I was in full panic, and I didn't want to look back. I didn't look back. I kept driving as fast as I could. I was a mess. I wanted to cry and pull over and try to get some composure, but I wouldn't dare stop on that road. I finally made it to the main road, and I felt at ease that there were more cars on the road. My heart was racing, and I was having a panic attack. I'll never take that road again. I have no idea what I saw, but I'm guessing it was a skinwalker. Rectangular shape crosses road. Whitewater, Wisconsin, 2016. As I was driving to work down a dark country road, between two empty fields, a route that I've taken daily for the past year and a half, a rectangular shape about 4 feet wide passed across the street in front of me. The shape was transparent, and it was only visible because I had my high beams on. My beams kind of reflected off of it as they would off of fog. However, this shape had very definite sides. I could not tell where the top of it was because I could not see anything beyond how high my headlights went. I first caught sight of it as it was in the oncoming traffic lane. I thought it might be a shadow, but there were no other cars on the road and no other sources of light out of the ordinary. I realized the shape was moving across the street in front of me. I lifted off the gas to make sure I would not intercept it. The shape did not vary in size or form as it moved to the right. The width and speed remained consistent. I had chills come across my body as I watched it travel and realized I had no idea what it was. It reached the right side of the road when I was probably no more than 8 feet away from it. At that point it was leaving the range of my headlights and was no longer visible. For the past week and a half, I've been focusing on that portion of the road to see if I could find any other explanation, but I can't come up with anything. I'm basically just reaching out here to see if anyone has any ideas and if anyone else has ever encountered anything like this. My friend and I wandered into an abandoned village. Me and my friend Mercy are both sophomores, and I just got my driver's license and bought a minivan with money I had saved up from my part-time job that I managed to get. We were sitting in my car, me in the driver's seat and her in the passenger seat scrolling on our phones, when she came up with an idea. We live in a small area surrounded by mountains, and she told me about an area located in those same mountains. She described people that we assumed were living there. They were disconnected from the real world, meaning they had no source of the internet. If I were being honest, I was a little bit skeptical about the idea, but I agreed and started driving. There was no exact location, so we wandered around, having all this free time since we skipped school. We examined everywhere we went, looking for a sign of human life, and it didn't take long when we finally came across what seemed to be buildings, built somewhat horribly with little to no supplies. "Is this it?" I asked her, looking around from the inside of my car. "I think so." She nodded hesitantly, and we drove slowly into the area, going 3 miles per hour, when we saw a lanky, pale figure and stopped. They had black grown out and matted hair. They were turned around so we couldn't see their face. Mercy kept her eyes glued to the person and mentioned they were abnormally tall and skinny. I brushed it off and looked around, seeing more people, around 2 others. This place was small, and since there weren't many buildings, we figured there couldn't be a lot of people living here. The figures I spotted were also turned around. I was getting a bit freaked out, but a little part of me was glad they didn't notice us and come over to my car. A song was playing on low volume when it suddenly turned up automatically. None of us touched the speaker, and it was odd and scared both of us. I quickly turned it off and looked up with fear in my eyes. It seemed they noticed we were here when the music sounded. When I looked up, I saw the figures had turned around and more had shown up in front of my car. Their faces were as pale as their bodies, maybe a bit paler, but what really got to me and Mercy was the fact they had no face, all but one. One creepy figure in the far corner behind a rusty, poorly built house. He had a face, but he had a traumatized look plastered on it, mouthing words, but I couldn't quite figure out what he was saying. I looked back in front of my car, and the figures started to inch closer to us, their bony hands reaching out slowly. I quickly put the car in reverse and drove out, returning back to the city. The drive back home was quiet, really quiet. School hours ended, and I dropped her off back at her house. We didn't talk about it all day, and she had a weird look in her eyes. It's been a week, and she's never shown interest in the things she likes anymore. I've tried to bring it up with her, but she gets pale every time, so I stopped since it freaks me out. The pale color that gets plastered on her face always reminded me of the incident, and I got quick flashbacks, sometimes hallucinations when I didn't get enough sleep the night prior. I had a friend in college who lived down this bumpy old farm track, and I bloody hated driving down it at night in my little car. No matter what the weather, it was always pitch black and misty. Various members of her family had mentioned the soldier, who would apparently watch you from the side of the road. Now I don't think I believe in ghosts, so I always dismissed it as nonsense until one night I absolutely saw someone standing in the field watching me. Well, I ducking bombed it all the way to the dual carriageway. Their house and stables were the only thing at the end of the track, and it was nearly midnight when I left, so there's no good reason for anyone to have been there. I rang her as soon as I was on the main road. Her dad and boyfriend went out to look and didn't see anything. But I didn't sleep that night and refused to go back at night after that. A coworker told me about something that happened to him a few years ago that introduced me to a place called the Bridgewater Triangle. They're making a documentary series about it now. Accounts of sightings of Bigfoot, Thunderbirds, poltergeists, and UFOs. I'll share the story here. A coworker of mine finally worked up the courage to tell me something that happened to him after our holiday party a few years ago when we were out for drinks the other day. After some light drinking, we left our holiday party and walked back to our cars. He said the last thing he remembered was getting in his car in the parking lot. He lost track of about 5 to 6 hours and got stuck in his car, which crashed into a tree in thickly settled woods. After managing to get out the totaled car, he walked around and realized he had no idea where he was. He called one of his friends and was pretty incoherent, so his friends called the local police in the county we work in. They were able to get the ping on his phone with his coordinates and determined he was about 2 miles into a wooded area. Here's where it gets weird. Where he crashed, it was physically impossible to navigate a vehicle to. There were no paths that led to where he was from the road. It was the middle of winter, and there was snow on the ground, and there were no tracks leading to where he crashed. It took the police about 3 to 4 hours to find him, and they had to bring in a bobcat to knock down trees to evacuate his vehicle. The police never gave him a DUI or anything, but they questioned him on his familiarity with something called the Bridgewater Triangle. After some research, I found that the Bridgewater Triangle is an area of towns in Massachusetts centered around swampland called the Hockomock Swamp, Native American translated to the place where spirits dwell. Where we're from is where the biggest battle between English settlers and a coalition of Native American tribes took place in King Philip's War. This land has been subject to many paranormal activities since that have been documented in a documentary and a podcast. They are currently making a series about the Bridgewater Triangle with first-hand accounts, and I told my coworker he should contact the producers, but he's still shook about it. He went into a depression for about 2 months afterwards where he didn't work, and I didn't hear from him. Story from 20 plus years ago. I don't recall the actual date of this event, but I was a teenager, so we'll say it was the early 2000s. My father and I were driving home from somewhere in his car. It was just after sunset, and the sun had all but vanished behind the horizon. Now this was in Georgia, so heavily wooded and not many streetlights in this area. As we came to a stoplight perpendicular to a larger 2-lane road that was bridged over an embankment, we saw the road was empty and just kind of both were sitting quietly. As we did, an older, maybe 60s 70s, dark-colored 4-door vehicle with its lights off careened down the road, then went straight through the guardrails of the bridge and disappeared. I kind of sat there for a minute thinking I was hallucinating, then I turned to my dad, and he was looking too. I asked, "Did you see that?" He confirmed that he saw what I saw. We drove to the area where the vehicle disappeared and noticed the guardrail was not damaged, not even a little bit. We then took a light and shone it down into the woods and brush and saw nothing. I tried to look up news articles afterwards about a wreck or anything similar on that stretch of roadway and found nothing. We still remember it today and bring it up from time to time. Super weird. I thought I'd share my only strange paranormal encounter I've had. All creature seen on the side of the road. Sometime in the summer of 2007 near the town of Cala, province of Huelva, Spain, at 2:30 a.m., a couple traveling on the national highway on the outskirts of Cala noticed on the rearview mirror what appeared to be the lights of an approaching vehicle, but soon realized that it was something different, since the lights were round and much brighter and appeared to be traveling about 5-6 above the ground. The lights approached quickly and stopped at about a meter from the vehicle. They were so bright that the witnesses could not look at the rearview mirror directly. Upon reaching a curve, the driver attempted to accelerate, but the lights turned with him and stopped, and he did not continue to follow. The witness then slowed down and looked back but did not see the lights anymore. The witnesses then continued on and moments later spotted a very tall figure about 7 to 7 feet 5 inches in height, very thin and all dressed in red, including red boots and a red visor that covered the stranger's face down to its mouth. The strange figure seemed to be climbing the ditch on the side of the road in a very peculiar manner since it didn't appear to be moving its arms and seemed to be sliding upwards on the ground. It moved past the witnesses, completely ignoring them. The witnesses continued to drive, and when they looked behind them, they no longer were able to see the tall figure. About 25 years ago, my immediate family as well as aunts, uncles, and cousins went camping at a park in East Texas, as we did every year for most of my childhood and adolescence. My cousin and I were driving my dad's truck to the bathroom/showers late at night. I was 15 or so, and as we were turning into the campground area, the headlights of the truck passed over my cousin's campsite, and we both witnessed a large creature standing among their campsite, with really long hair. We were shocked and processing what we just saw as we drove just 50 feet or so more to the showers. We got out of the truck and were looking in that direction when we saw someone with a flashlight walking toward us. It was one of my cousins camping at that site, and he looked freaked out, saying he heard something walking around his site. Soon afterwards, we heard tapping high up in the trees. We freaked out and called it a night. It wasn't until many years later that I learned from one of the histories or discoveries that the East Texas Sasquatch was known to have long hair instead of short, gorilla-like hair. That sealed the deal for me because I know what I witnessed years prior was the real deal. Of course, nobody believes my story. Not even my wife and kids, lol. This occurred at midnight in Berlin, Maryland, on October 30th, 31st. I was riding with my friend Isaac on very rural backroads this night, and prior to this sighting, there were some extremely unusual occurrences that had already taken place, which I will go into detail about now. At about 9:30 we were driving to one of Isaac's friend's house and noticed we were being followed by a small hatchback with its lights off for roughly 7 or 8 miles before it turned into an empty parking lot, stopped for about 20 seconds, and then pulled across the street into a Wawa parking lot and parked facing the direction we were going with the lights on. After this happened and we had gone to said friend's house, we took an alternate and longer route home than usual. We had turned onto the highway, and nothing unusual was happening until we turned onto the back roads of Berlin. Isaac had begun complaining about blurry vision and a headache immediately after I saw what looked like a large humanoid figure jump what looked like 10 to 15 feet into the air out of the bushes. I was the only one out of the two of us to see this. About 1.5 miles down the road, past a bend, we both saw an extremely deformed and unusually moving deer. Its legs seemed to bend inward, and its snout was moving in a way that it absolutely was not meant to. It was curling all the way back nearly into its eyes. It was also darting back and forth extremely fast with its strange inward bending legs. It was horrifying to watch and even scarier, so there was an opossum that was crossing the road, which we had to slow down for only 15 feet in front of this deer. Interestingly, about 45 minutes earlier we had to slow down for a different opossum on a different stretch of road and immediately saw a deer standing near the road afterward. Me and Isaac were both very disturbed by this sighting, and we haven't spoken about it since. I have had nightmares about seeing the deer ever since. The deer had normal coloration and was about the size of a doe. It had no antlers, and I don't recall it having very visible or large ears. It made no noise as we passed by. I had a good visual of the deer for roughly 15 to 20 seconds before we passed it. We were driving at about 45 to 50 miles per hour, and Isaac saw it shortly after I had pointed it out. Immediately after seeing, I felt immensely anxious and also sad, to the point where I almost cried for no conscious reason. I am still disturbed as to what I saw, and I hope to never see it again. About 6 to 7 years ago, my wife and I were headed home at about 10 p.m. on a rural highway in my area. At the time, we lived in a city in Snohomish County, Washington. As we were coming around a corner before an incline in the highway, something crossed the two eastbound lanes. There was a car about 2 car lengths in front of us in the passing lane. We were in the right lane. Just in front of the other car, we saw an electric blue glowing thing cross the highway. The other car braked quickly, just like we did. It was slightly shorter than the width of the 2 lanes, but it was so bright blue in the pitch black that there seemed to be an afterimage that made it difficult to tell where it actually ended. It moved in a zigzag serpentine motion and crossed from the left to right in about a second and headed into the woods on our side of the road. Both my wife and I saw it, and like I said, the other car reacted too. I am at a total loss for what it is. Washington doesn't seem to be known for ball lightning, and I am going to assume it was some sort of natural phenomenon, but it left such a weird feeling for us afterwards that I thought I would reach out to you guys and see if anyone might have another idea. I welcome any and all theories, natural and unnatural, that might explain what we encountered. Thank you for any information. I was hanging out with my best friend when she was living with her parents out in a rural community in Victoria County, Texas. She and her dad had told me some stories in the past of odd occurrences in the neighborhood, but I hadn't actually seen anything in their area myself. I will say I have seen and heard plenty of strange things happen in and around Victoria County as well as nearby counties. But never this. That particular night, my friend and I were bored and decided to go into town to hit up a bar. To describe her neighborhood, picture one main road that makes a big loop all the way from one section of a highway to another section of the same highway. Off one side of this road was a very large cornfield and a couple farmhouses, and off the other side were the 2 long main roads of my friend's neighborhood. Those 2 main roads had one short road connecting them about halfway down, then another short road going between them again at the very end. Almost like a boxy digital 8, but the top line keeps going in both directions. She lived at the very end of one of the longer roads. We got into her car, and we started driving up her road. She began telling me some story or some gossip from work, I don't remember. The topic of conversation isn't important, just that she was talking at the time. I'm sort of half listening and staring blankly out through the windshield. We had gotten to just about, or maybe a little past the halfway point, when I saw her headlights illuminate this thing, walking across her road up where it ends at the main road that connects to the highway. It was very tall, impossibly skinny, pale, and grayish. For reference of how it moved, picture or look up that scene from Signs when they showed the birthday party footage on the news, but it was a little faster, more fluid, and the arms and legs were longer. I got instant chills as it passed in front of us. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but just as I told myself that, I heard my friend say, "What the duck was that?" and realized she had stopped telling her story and that she had brought her car to a full stop as well. She stepped on the gas, and we got up to the main road as fast as we could, but when we got up there, neither of us could see anything in either direction, as it was too dark with no streetlight, and her headlights only showed the crop in front of us. We were both a little shaken up and ended up not trying to pursue it and just sticking to the plan and heading to town. But I remember being terrified of leaving her house later to go home. Neither of us ever saw it again. I haven't heard any stories since about similar sightings in my area. I don't know what I thought it was at the time. I didn't have a word for it. I'm wondering if it may have been a crawler. Almost exactly a year ago I had the most terrifying experience of my life, in the midst of a 7,000-mile road trip, and I can't even explain why it haunts me. Okay, so this month marks the 1-year point from when this road trip happened. The specific story that I need to tell has made tears run down my face every time I've thought about it, and if I try telling anyone, I start outright sobbing. I don't cry often, but the fear is still so visceral. My brother and I drove out to see our friends in Portland, Oregon, from Ohio. The drive there was pretty uneventful. We drove nonstop and made it in a little over 2 days. The only thing that both of us noticed was that on long expanses of country roads with no driveways or connecting roads, a car would suddenly be driving behind us. We chalked that part up to being tired and not noticing an approaching vehicle, but within 5 minutes the car would be suddenly gone. We both shouted the first time in unison, and my brother is an ever-logical person who usually calms me down if I think something is off, but he was as freaked out as I was. That first time was within 5 hours of starting our trip, so I don't think it was fatigue. It happened a couple more times, but eventually we just would point it out and laugh because, what else could we do? The scary part was on our drive home. We decided to drive down through California and through the southern states because neither of us had seen the landmarks they're famous for, redwoods, Grand Canyon, etc. We drove the coastal highway, saw the redwoods, and got all the way through San Francisco the first day and into the night. Once out of San Francisco, I was driving, and my brother turned over to sleep for a couple hours, no big deal. But my GPS started trying to reroute us. Over and over again, I would click on the coastal highway route and drive for about 10 minutes before it would switch to a different route, and I would notice belatedly. After like an hour of getting turned around in the middle of nowhere over and over again, I decided any route heading to Los Angeles would look the same in the dark, so I followed the GPS. It took a solid 10 minutes before I made it to a highway. Cue the tears. I'm literally starting to cry as I write this. At this highway, my GPS told me to turn left, but there was a median and a very clear no left turn sign. Another sign said Route 1 south with an arrow pointing right. I had originally wanted to take 1 south, so perfect. I turned right. I want to make this very clear. I drove for 2 miles on that highway. Maybe 4, because I'm not sure if the exits were every mile or every 2 miles. But 5 minutes. I was on the highway for 5 minutes. I know this because I obsessively check the time. I always have. From the minute I turned right instead of left, my GPS literally started spinning the map. It wouldn't reroute, it didn't make any suggestions, it just stopped all functionality of being a GPS. I was stressed, I didn't recognize any names on the road signs, and I decided to get off the highway. I passed 1 exit total and got off at the second exit. 5 minutes from where I turned onto the highway. The second I took the exit, my GPS immediately rerouted me. A car exited behind me and made the same first turn as I did. And the next. And the next. The GPS took me through pitch-black country roads, on, and all the while the headlights of the car behind blared into my rear-view mirror. After about 15 minutes, tears started rolling down my cheeks. I was scared every time we came to a stop sign. I thought we were going to be killed. Irrational maybe, but that's what I was thinking. I was just plain scared. 45 minutes. This car followed behind us for 45 minutes. I was trying to be calm and rational. I let my brother sleep. I thought maybe I was being stupid, and this was actually a well-known route through California. 45 minutes. And I saw a streetlight finally at the stop sign ahead. I prayed there was a gas station, or convenience store, or anywhere populated. But do you want to know what was at that stop sign? The turn on is for the highway. The one with the median. With the no left turn sign. The exact same spot I had been at almost an hour before. Again, I was on the highway for 5 minutes before exiting. I followed the GPS from the second I exited. Beginning of this post, it's been a year. I honestly may have forgotten the finer details that made this event so awful for me. All I know is what I included in this post, and it still not only makes me cry but has me jumping at every noise in my house. Everything about the event makes my skin absolutely crawl. So anyway, please give your theories. I'm open to anything, just curious what everyone thinks. It was such a traumatic night that I haven't felt the need to theorize or try to understand it. In the end, it doesn't really matter what really happened, because I will always have the haunting memory and will probably never be in the same place. Another beastly encounter from Denver. Hello, I was directed here to share about the large standing dog-like creature seen in the Lakewood suburbs of Denver. I had an experience in August 2012 about 8 miles north of the Lakewood incident. My ex-girlfriend and I were traveling north on Route 93 in Golden, Colorado, on our way home. It was about 8 p.m. and still daylight. We were behind a tractor trailer that without warning slammed its brakes to avoid hitting an animal crossing the roadway from the right. To our left, we could see a tall beast emerge from in front of the truck, running on 2 legs towards the bluffs west of the highway. I swore at the time that it looked like a huge wolf running upright on 2 back legs. I was amazed at how quickly it was able to move. The tractor trailer driver had jumped out of his cab with a rifle, pointing it in the direction of this beast, but it was too far away by that time. I was simply scared out of my mind by what we had seen. I just drove around the truck and continued on my way. My ex-girlfriend was speechless and refused to talk about it. There's no way I was going to stop and talk to the driver or anyone else. There were several cars in the opposite lane that had stopped as well. I recently talked to someone I trusted, who is an outdoorsman, about what I saw. He mentioned that there were rumors about man-like beasts in the mountains, but he had never seen anything. He gave me no indication that any of these looked like wolves. Do you think the witness in Lakewood saw the same beast? Thanks for listening. I bike instead of driving, and while I've had more terrifying catcall experiences, this one is undoubtedly the creepiest. So it's night, and I'm biking home in the dark, and my light is broken enough that it needs constant pressure on a button to stay turned on. The tape over the button is being stretched and giving out as I ride, and just around the time I'm coming into this residential strip that doesn't have streetlights. So I'm in mostly total darkness, and the main road is the only road option. All the side streets perpendicular to this road just end as cul-de-sacs. I'm biking along and there's very minimal traffic, and slowly this minivan pulls up next to me from behind and starts keeping pace with me, which is weird because they have the full road to themselves. I look into the car and make eye contact with the driver, who is an old man and looking straight at me, not even remotely at the road. I nope the duck out and slow way down, and the van continues to crawl forward. He's going slow, but I can outslow him. I'm a bike. I notice there are no longer any other cars on the road at all. There are no stoplights on this street, only stop signs, and we're both in a race of slowness. He finally makes it to the stop sign and discreetly pulls over to the curb and keeps his engine running. Waiting for me. Remember, I can't turn down any of the side streets and have to face him to get home. So I'm riding the center divider basically, being as far from the car as possible, and when I get within range, I look at him again. He's still staring at me with 100% intent focus. He guns it straight at me, and I'm biking super speed and zooming in front of the van and crossing over to make it onto the sidewalk. I get there, and he starts driving down the road, and every time I look over, he's staring intensely. He's talking to his phone in one hand. I decide to stare him down, and we just have locked eye contact for a full block before he just out of nowhere pulls a U-turn and drives away. It was uphill 3 miles home after that, but I booked it the whole way, frantically looking over my shoulder. I made it home safe. I never saw him again, but I never biked that route at night again, so who knows. Lost time and strange lights in Mexico. I was 16, in Mexico in a small town in the mountains, visiting family. One night me and my cousin 19 went to the park in his dad's truck, which was a small Nissan extended cab we borrowed with the condition to feed the animals at his dad's farm. Like kids, we didn't go to the farm first, we played basketball till 10ish. After we rode down the mountain, about 2 miles down, into a clearing that was there where his dad had his farm. As we get close to the pin, we hear all the animals crying, and as we look, they are huddled into a corner of the pin, crying like there's danger. My cousin tells me to grab the .22 LR rifle from the back seat of the truck. As I do and I'm in the process of turning around, the brightest light I ever seen comes on to where it looks like it's daylight outside. I can see across the mountain like it's day. I grew up in some of the poorest and worst neighborhoods around Miami, so I know a helicopter spotlight when I see and hear one. At this point, I'm looking up through the windshield to see where it's coming from. There was no direct point, it looked to just be on, and there was no noise from a helicopter or any similar vehicle, and it's super quiet. Even the animals all stopped crying. The truck turns off at this point. We are in a bit of a panic because it's not coming on. Since it's a manual transmission and we were on an incline, we started to put it in gear and let it roll to start it. After about the 6 to 7 try it comes on, he hits a U-turn and we are going up onto the main road. Next thing you know, we are home. Me and him can't remember how we got home or what path we took to get home. There's only 2 ways to get there. One road takes you through the town, the other takes you by the river and dam. We can't recall which one we took, and all we remember is making it to the main road off the farm road. As in this small town the newspaper is printed every 2 days, he showed me an article 2 days later or a day later where a reporter was questioning local government officials and police and military personnel about the lights that were hovering over the valley that night. The article ends with no one knowing or admitting to know anything about it. I saw the Jersey Devil in 2016. I lived in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and worked in Palmerton. I worked the late shift, so I'd get out of work at 10 p.m. one night. As I was heading home late because of overtime, I think it was about 1 a.m., I was driving down the road at the above coordinates. I saw 2 red dots of light from far away, but they seemed to be approaching my car very quickly. I slow down, and suddenly these massive bat or dragon-like leather wings come gliding with a single flap motion just over my car. It was so surreal and happened extremely quickly, but I didn't see its face or body details. It was a new moon, and there's only my headlights out there. I slammed on the brakes and got out, but it's just total darkness, and this thing was black. I'd say its wingspan was about 10 or 11 feet. I've seen a condor before, and it was pretty much that size. Just massive. But I could hear it flying away after I stopped and got out. There was just no moonlight, so I couldn't see it, but it sounded like when you spread a sheet out on a bed or throw a tarp over something. I've only told 3 people this story, but I figure I might as well post it somewhere so people can try to get a picture or something. It'd be cool to see it again. It was the COVID summer, and my 2 friends and I were dreadfully bored. The 3 of us spent a lot of time driving around, to Sonic or the miserable state of Iowa. We also went randonauting several times. Gas was cheap, and it was enjoyable to go down roads we hadn't ever turned onto before. On our 3rd or 4th trip, we had done 2 very normal locations with goofy intentions set and saw nothing out of the ordinary. We decided to go to one more location before calling it a night. We always had our perimeter set small, not wanting to go further than about 30 minutes out from our town. The 3rd location, with the intention of just showing us something, gave us coordinates less than 5 minutes from my grandma's house, in a neighborhood. When we got to the location, there was nothing. It was a random road in a suburb. All was very quiet, dark, and normal. But as we went to leave, with the Maps app guiding us, we ended up getting lost in the neighborhood. Somehow, we ended up coming up on the spot again, from the same direction as before. But this time, all 3 of us in the car saw a brightly shining gold figure in the middle of the road, probably 20 or so feet from the front of the car. We were silent, until it moved to the side of the road, behind a car parked on the curb, and disappeared. Without addressing what we had just seen, all of us started to say we need to go almost simultaneously. It was until we were back on a main road that the question of "did y'all see that too?" was finally raised. We all agreed on the limited features we saw: gold, glowing, about 4 feet tall, and no definable features on its orb/cylinder shape. We didn't know what to make of it then, and we still go "hey, remember when" to each other now. After that night, we didn't go randonauting again, and my friend started hanging a cross necklace from her rear view mirror. None of us are the type to believe in physical manifestations of the supernatural, and I can't think of any rational explanation for what we saw that night. Event in Red Ash, Tennessee. I haven't spoken about these events to anyone since they've happened to me over a decade ago, honestly, closer to 15 years. I am now a 30-year-old man, and what I experienced in Red Ash, Caryville, Tennessee, happened to me when I was about 15 or 16 years old. Red Ash is a small area off Interstate 75 running through Campbell County, Tennessee, the county where I was born and raised and still reside now. Red Ash was established over 100 years ago as a little mining province but is now defined as the land between Red Ash Cemetery and Red Ash Baptist Church off of Old Tennessee Highway 63, and if you go Googling it, you'll see that it has a reputation of arguably being one of the most haunted places in Tennessee. From ghosts of miners, goatmen, and even-ended witches, if you read long and deep enough, you'll see there's lots of strange happenings around this area. But I am not here to tell you I saw a 7-foot tall man with the head of a goat and hooven feet standing at the base of a train track tussle. However, I still find it difficult to explain what I witnessed. About 15 years ago, a few friends and I, one guy who was a couple years older than myself and two lady friends of ours, were driving around one Saturday night looking to find something to get into in our small, quiet town. So naturally, of course, we came to the conclusion to do what all the teenage kids do that grow up in our county. We decided to go to Red Ash and test some of the legends, and boy, are there a lot of them? But those are stories for a different page. This one isn't about urban legends. This is about what I actually saw. We went to a set of train tracks that if you park on and turn your vehicle off that, somehow, the car will start to rock and gently roll off the tracks. That didn't work for us. So we decided to head up the road to the cemetery to tell ghost stories. On the ride to the cemetery, one of the girls with us said her grandpa had told her on one of the unnamed dirt roads in Red Ash is an old, abandoned graveyard where a lady was ended and buried almost 200 years ago for supposedly being a witch. We thought what the hell and decided to go looking for this graveyard to see if we could find the unmarked grave. We turned down one dirt road barely wide enough for my friend's small car and drove down it for a few minutes when all of a sudden we're hit with blue lights behind us. And when I say it all of a sudden, I mean it. Now, mind you, it was around midnight and pretty dark out, but we didn't see headlights or anything trailing behind us. Just the burst of blue police lights. My friend pulls off the road as much as possible, and the cop pulls behind us and gets out of his cruiser and walks to the door. My friend already has his window down. It's late July and 80 degrees at night with no AC in his car, and he is waiting to be asked for his license and registration. The cop doesn't ask for it. He walks up and looks through the rolled down window at my friend and says, "You guys shouldn't be here. It's dangerous and a bad place. Please leave." Now I'm not sure about you guys, but hearing a cop say shouldn't and please isn't normal. Usually, we hear can't and now. But that's what he said, and it threw my friend off, and he kind of stammered for words before the cop repeated himself, "Please tell me you'll turn around, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." This time, though, my friend said yes, sir, and the cop just turned around and walked back to his car, turned off his lights, and drove around us, continuing on the road. That's when I noticed he wasn't driving one of the Tahoes or Chargers they typically drove, but a Crown Vic and an old Crown Vic. An early 80s square-body Crown Victoria car. It was so bizarre. But we didn't think much of it then. We just decided to head straight and follow him and turn around when he did. We followed him for a few seconds, up until he went up the hill on the dirt road and went around a curve. Once we got up there, past the curve, and we noticed he was gone. I couldn't see any signs of his vehicle or anything. He wasn't pulled over off the road, so we thought he might have been more familiar with the road and must have sped up to get to the end of it. So we followed the road for a couple more miles, no sign of the cop anywhere. Until we got to the end of the road, and it ended in a dead end. The cop was still nowhere to be found. No signs of him passing us, pulling off the road, which was barely wide enough for him to pass us while we were pulled off it earlier, and there were no roads connecting to this old dirt road. So many little weird things happened, and honestly, I still don't know what I saw or how to explain it. All I can say is that things are weird up there around Red Ash, and even now, I still listen to that cop. It's dangerous up there, and I stay away from it. Help identifying a four-legged creature. A very close friend of mine told me a story last night in regards to an encounter he had, and I was wondering if anyone here knows what it may have been. My friend was driving through a valley just after sunset a few years ago when something ran across the road in front of his car. His description of it was that it ran on all four legs and had big shoulders. He said the way it moved was almost like how a gorilla runs on all fours. Now he hit this thing at speed and felt the car jolt as he ran over it. Obviously worried about damage to the vehicle and the possibility of hitting someone's animal, he got out of his car to find nothing. No blood, no damage to the car, no sign of any creature. He hightailed it out of there. Has anyone had a similar experience or could shed some light on what this may have been? Keep in mind this happened in New Zealand, where there are no bears, wolves, or anything of the sort. Our biggest predators are possums, stoats, and other Mustelidae. So a couple years ago, my mom and I were leaving from a visit with my grandma. For reference, she lives in an old folks mobile park on the countryside of the town in southern Washington. It's completely dark out, and I'm driving the car with my headlights on. As we are taking the exit road, I slam on my brakes as what looks clearly like a coyote darts in front of my car. My mom and I both see it. It shoots to the left, and I follow it with my eyes as it runs into the field of cows beside us. My mom doesn't have great vision and lost it in the darkness, but I could still see it. Sharing this always makes people look at me funny, but this was the realest thing I've seen. The coyote stood on its hind legs and was much taller than a normal coyote would have been if it were to stand up. Somehow between it running in the field and standing up, I noticed there were antlers on its head. Like moose antlers. My eyes started to water, and I got the worst sensation flood over me, like get away now. I had goosebumps all over, and even though my mom didn't see it, she had goosebumps too, like her body knew something was wrong. I'm sure I'm not the only one to experience this. Has anyone seen something similar? This happened about 3 years ago, and I can still remember it very vividly. Make damn sure you avoid the backwoods of eastern Kentucky. Driving through the backwoods of eastern Kentucky in the dead of night is the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Anyone who's ever been in the area knows exactly what I'm talking about. All the light from the moon and the stars is blocked by thick vegetation and hills, so it's pitch black. There's history in those hills, a lot of history, and this energy fills the place with this crazy bad vibe. It's like the very land is pissed at you, like it wants you dead. The roads aren't well traveled, and you'll be hard-pressed to see a single car driving down them at night. Cell service out there is, at least for me, spotty at best, non-existent at worst, and you pray to whatever you believe in that your car doesn't break down, knowing full well the folks who live smattered across the hills are isolated, private people, knowing that they wouldn't be very happy seeing you wandering onto their property in the dead of night. None too happy at all. It's what my mom calls bad country, one word. She always told me to avoid the area if I could, saying that I'd likely be murdered or worse out there. And I've heard the stories too. Stories about people getting out of their cars to help a stranded motorist, only to be ambushed, robbed, kidnapped, and or murdered. Stories about strange lights and ghost killers, vanishing hitchhikers, and crazy and bred hillbilly families. There are said to be hundreds of unreported deaths out there, people just vanishing off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. I've always avoided driving through those hills, but one night I found myself driving straight down KY 52 South instead of I-75 South, straight into those hills, straight into their darkness. Around midnight, I got a message from my mom that my dad had been taken to the hospital and that his condition was serious. I immediately jumped out of bed and into my car, despite my mom telling me to wait until morning to drive down. I lived up in Richmond at the time, while my parents were down in Hazard. It's a little under a 2-hour drive via I-75 South and a little over 2 via KY 52 South. That night, though, I-75 South was closed due to an overnight bridge reconstruction project, so I had to take KY 52 southbound, and it goes through some pretty gnarly bad country. I figured nothing would happen, that it'd be a smooth, yet anxiety-ridden, 2-hour-ish trip, but there was this dread I couldn't shake boiling up in my gut, urging me to wait until morning. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to see my dad. I got from Richmond to Irvine just fine, driving the winding road and hilly terrain with ease, going faster than the speed limit. It was from Irvine to Jackson that things took a turn for the worst. First off, it was dark. Really ducking dark, and even with my brights on, they still only barely lit up the surrounding area. The constantly curving roads didn't help either. I found myself slowing down, having to navigate through the dark, around the switchbacks and turns, inclines and depressions, hoping to God I didn't run off the road or hit an oncoming vehicle. And the dread was at the forefront of everything now. Sure, it could have been exacerbated by worry for my dad, but there's something about those hills, something evil, and I was really ducking afraid. The radio was dipping in and out, so I put in a CD, Dio, and tried to drown out the fear with music, but after the first song, I turned off the stereo completely and drove in silence, all my senses on high alert. It felt wrong. It felt like I was being watched. Every so often, I would see a light flash in the woods, like campfire, but brighter. And I swear at one point between Crystal and Beattyville there was this pale and hairless and huge humanoid running after my car next to the road. Swear I saw it in the rearview mirror. It disappeared into the darkness and the trees when I braked and spun around in my seat. 30 minutes out of Beattyville I saw a kid. He was wearing a yellow shirt, blue shorts, and a red jacket, hood up, colors that reminded me of Superman. He wasn't wearing shoes. That bothered me. I flicked my brights down to their normal strength and slowed to a crawl, wondering what the hell this kid, who looked to be under 10, was doing out in the middle of bumduck nowhere. I made sure my doors were locked, cracked my window, and asked him if he was okay as I rolled toward him. He didn't respond. I glanced down at my phone. No service. Shit. I asked him if he was okay again, and he looked up at me quickly, making his hood fall down. He was crying. I slowed to a stop, and he immediately ran over, sticking dirty fingers into the crack of my window, pounding on the door. He was screaming something about how they were hunting him and that they were going to let the monster eat him, and they were watching us now, waiting, just beyond the darkness. At this point, I was seriously freaking out, and I might have been screaming too. I tried to roll my window up while trying to not hurt the kid, but he wouldn't release his grip on my window. I think he was trying to break it. A bright light flashed onto us, and the kid screamed even louder, let go of my car, and began running down the road, back towards Beattyville. And, I'm ashamed to say, I took off. I was afraid I was going to die and become another statistic of these hills. In my rearview mirror, I watched as what looked like 3 men in hooded robes ran out onto the road. The spotlight one of them was holding was trained onto my car and hit the mirror at an angle that blinded me, but it looked like the other 2 were going after the kid. I blinked and looked back towards the road, speeding like a bat out of hell. I pulled off in Jackson and drove straight to the police station. 2 detectives and an FBI agent who happened to be in town working with a liaison listened to me with grave faces. When I was finished, the FBI agent thanked me, then told me that a kid had gone missing the day before from a Bible camp near the Kentucky River. He said that's why he was in town in the first place. Apparently, the kid and his friends were out playing hide and seek in the woods in broad daylight when he just disappeared. He was wearing yellow, blue, and red, like Superman. The strange thing is, his footsteps just stopped, and his shoes were still there. It was like he was lifted off the ground by air. It was weird. Half a dozen cop cars with twice as many cops, the agent, and a search and rescue team were dispatched to the area within minutes after me reporting what I'd seen. I drove to a local diner and ended up staying in Jackson until morning, making the 40-ish minute drive down to Hazard after the sun rose. After hearing why it took me so long to get down there, my mom was beside herself with panic but was also glad I was okay, telling me I did what I had to do to survive, that I was brave, and wasn't a coward. My dad ended up making a full recovery. If you're wondering if I do feel like a ducking coward, if I regret not letting that kid into my car, the answer is a resounding yes, I do, I am. It haunts me to this day. But I don't know what would have happened if I stayed there any longer, and I don't know if either of us would have made it out alive. No trace of the kid was ever found. In late 2011, I had quite a few seemingly supernatural or anomalous experiences. The one that I continue to come back to happened when I was driving to my apartment on what should have been an uneventful day. I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was driving back from the beach area. This should have been a 20-minute straight shot down a familiar thoroughfare, but someone or something had other plans for me. I was about halfway home, and I remember having the urge to blink. When I reopened my eyes, I felt slightly dizzy. I immediately noticed that I was no longer on the familiar street. In fact, I had no clue where I was. I was in a fairly remote area, and there were no other cars around. I drove around for no less than 15 minutes looking for a street sign or landmark. I finally found one. Much to my dismay, I was about 10 miles from Gainesville, Florida. This is roughly 70 miles from where I'd been. No real time had passed, and my gas tank looked unchanged. I was practically on E when I glitched out, and I was still pretty much on E at that point. When I realized where I was, I instantly became dismayed. I followed the road sign in the towards Jacksonville direction and kept straight. After about a minute or two of driving, I noticed that landmarks that I'd just passed were coming around again. And again. And again. I was stuck in some sort of loop. Each time the loop restarted, I'd panic. I'd be back to seeing the same dusty houses and the same sign pointing me towards home. This went on for another 15 minutes before I eventually had to pull over. If I remember correctly, I even cried a bit. At some point, I realized that my only course of action would be to will myself home. So I did just that. I sat there and calmly asserted that I was getting home by any means necessary. I started driving again, and lo and behold, the road actually started taking me towards Jacksonville this time. The long road home was anything but normal. If I'd get distracted and start fretting about what just happened, the way home would change. This was even after I got back to more familiar territory. I'd turn onto a familiar street and would instantly be on some other street on another side of town. All in all, it took me about 4 hours to get home. Wasted a lot of gasoline, and tears, as well. I still wonder about this. The whole situation just felt devilish, like something was toying with me in the worst way. It's a testament to the fact that our reality is nothing like what we've been taught. It's not so knock-knock physical, it's much more fluid and based on consciousness. Also, willpower is a muthadaka. This event happened several years ago, but it still stands as one of the strangest things to ever happen to me. As mentioned in the title, this took place in Arizona on what I believe is the Gila River Indian Reservation. I was in the car going for a drive with my 2 sisters, my brother, and his now wife. It was late at night, and we began telling scary stories to scare each other out. Specifically, my brother was telling us about how sometimes gangs in cars will flash their headlights at you, and if you flash them back then they follow you home and kill you. I have no idea if that's true, but it sounded scary as we were alone on a 2-lane dirt road in the middle of the Indian reservation. It is also important to note that this road was not flat. There were pretty sizable dips in the road, not big enough to be considered hills but enough to be noticeable if that makes sense. Several minutes later, we see another car heading in the opposite direction as us on the road we were on. The car was coming toward us. Out of nowhere, the car starts flashing their headlights at us, which seemed like such a strange coincidence because we had just talked about that occurring. We all started panicking, and my brother told my sister, who was driving, to calm down and not do anything back. As I mentioned, there were dips in the road, so the car's headlights disappeared below one of the dips in the road. At this point the car was maybe 15 feet away from ours. We were all paying extra close attention to this car because of the headlights thing, so we were anticipating what would happen as they drove past us. But the headlights never reappeared. It was as if the car was never even on the road. All 5 of us saw the exact same thing, and we all lost our minds out of terror. We all checked both sides of the road to see if the car had just pulled over, but there was no trace of it anywhere. There were also lots of cacti and bushes off to the side of the road, so it would have been very obvious if the car had driven over them into the desert. To this day, I haven't heard any stories like this and can't explain it. A large, hairy humanoid was witnessed in the road. The witnesses were returning from visiting family on Chestnut Ridge on their way home. About halfway down Mud Pike, the driver saw what appeared to be a large, hairy animal cross the road walking upright. He did not see it very clearly and could not rule out a bear walking on hind legs. But it did get his attention, and he slowed to a crawl as he passed the area where he saw it. Using a flashlight, both witnesses were trying to catch a glimpse of it in the woods below. They did not see that creature again. Suddenly a second creature came from the bank on the left into the path of their car, about 20 feet ahead. The driver immediately slammed on his brakes and stopped with the creature clearly visible in the headlights, about 10 to 15 feet in front of the car. Neither witness had a camera, so no photos were obtained. I asked them to describe the creature. It was about 7 feet high, standing upright on 2 legs with arms before. The driver again stopped the car, and the creature did likewise. After a short time, the driver put the car in low and began creeping toward the creature. The creature stood still and did not move from the spot where it stopped. It did put its arms forward as if to protect itself. The car continued to move forward very slowly, to the point where both occupants could feel the car make contact with the creature. It put its arms out and placed its hands on the front of the car, with the bumper against its legs. The driver stopped again and did not try to force his way through. The driver said he was ready to shift to reverse again and get the hell out of there. It was at that point the creature removed its hands from the car, took about 1 step forward, then proceeded to walk into the woods below the road. That was the last it was seen. The witnesses went home, and I was contacted next day. I followed up and did a personal interview. The above information was obtained at that time. I also examined the car for any evidence of contact. None was found. The car was also checked using UV/ear light for evidence of handprints or skin oils where the creature is alleged to have been in contact. Nothing was found, however. It must also be noted that they drove home about 7 miles in driving rain. It is possible any residue could have been washed off. I also went to the area on Mud Pike where the creature was seen in an attempt to find any tracks or other evidence. However, nothing was found. Much gravel and other debris was washed into the road from the heavy rain, so I would expect any such evidence, if it existed, to be destroyed. My impression of both witnesses is that they seem credible. I detected no sign they were seeking notoriety or wanted publicity. Both gave the same impression of the event, frightening, yet both wanted answers to what they experienced. No subsequent reports of any other sightings as of this time. If any come in, they will be referenced to this report. Summary cleared for release. Possible skinwalker sighting or something else? But here we go. I was out in my car at night in front of the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, specifically Mount Whitney. This was up the road before, right before the part that has been destroyed since 2022. The area where you learn about the Alabama hills. I have lived here since last year and I'm a person who is usually very skeptical about things. I can attest this area has a lot of supernatural and interesting things besides the beauty and solitude. After being in the car sitting from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., some interesting activities started. Some of the stars that were lower in the night sky seemed to move in a pattern but were bouncing like an animal. I noticed after I stopped focusing and sitting in the pitch black I saw vague shadow silhouettes that looked like giant cyclops with stars for eyes. They kept moving for about 3 hours, and after I stopped paying attention, I swear I saw red eyes on one of the other mountains that is closer to my right. After about 3 minutes, one of the giants seemed to be closer, and it suddenly changed. It went from that into a pitch black humanoid with white illuminated squares/rectangles on its body. They were on each arm and leg and torso with eyes that went from white to red and yellow. And it suddenly folded its torso in half and sat like a lion or canine on its butt with that human but not human face. It began to move towards the car as if stalking. I immediately turned the car on and headlights and got the duck out of there. I live in town but made sure I didn't let it follow me home, and I did keep on checking behind me. Just as I'm writing this, I'm hearing animal sounds in the distance, but ones I normally don't hear near the house. And this is the first night I'm thinking about it. I haven't gone back to that spot, but I will. It is a normally widely trafficked area during the day. But since the road closure, normally people walk up that road and into the trails during the day. Still, the odd night that was didn't really make me pay attention until the thing started to get closer. And from what I've read and heard, they can make you see things that they want you to. Maybe it saw me from a distance away and made me see things until it was close and could change and come at me? Though letting me see it and illuminating itself seems counterproductive to what they normally try and do. Could have been something else, maybe a spirit? This area is heavily saturated with ghosts and haunted spots. But who knows? Thank you for taking the time to listen to what I saw and for putting my thoughts into words. Where the hell did they end up? I know this one is a little far-fetched, but it's still one that I think about very often. Why? Because, what if? Date, May 1972. Location, Gadianton Canyon, Utah. Time, 11:30 p.m. Summary. 4 co-ed friends were driving on an isolated road near Modena when they reached an area where 2 sets of blacktop highway headed off into the desert. One veered sharply to the southeast, the other shooting northeast toward the canyon country. They decided to take the left road toward the canyon country. 5 minutes later, the Chevy entered a red rock canyon. One of the girls suddenly noticed that the car's headlights were shining more brightly on the pavement. Upon closer inspection, she gasped. The white centerline was gone. Instead of black asphalt, they were driving on white cement. Suddenly the highway ended abruptly at a rocky cliff face. The Chevy screeched to a stop in front of the cliff. They kept driving on the canyon road, hemmed in by red canyon walls. The canyon gradually gave way to open country. The girls gasped. Instead of moonlit desert, they saw grain fields on the right and a large lake with stands of ponderosa pine on the left. Up ahead, they spotted what appeared to be a tavern and an adjacent parking lot. It seemed to have a neon sign, but they could not read it. What should have been letters were brightly lit squiggles and curlicues. Some men came out of the building. They slowed down their vehicle, and one of the girls rolled down the window in order to ask for directions. They noticed what appeared to be consternation among the men. As if they'd been startled by some unknown animal. One of the girls stuck her head out the window and suddenly let out a terrified scream. She yelled at the driver to leave the area quickly. They looked back and saw that 4 queer-looking machines described as egg-shaped mounted on tricycle wheels were chasing them. That is, with 2 large wheels on the front and a smaller wheel in the rear. A single bright white headlight shone from the front of each pursuing machine. They made a strange whirring or buzzing sound as they rolled along. Ahead, the road led back into a red rock canyon. The road was very narrow and seemed to hem them in. They could no longer see their pursuers. Minutes later, they roared out of the canyon, back into the familiar desert. The car skidded down an arroyo and came to rest at the bottom. The girl that had stuck her head out the window was hysterical and could only describe that the men were not human. An hour later, they managed to flag down a highway patrol trooper that towed their vehicle from the area. No one could explain how the Chevy had gotten nearly 2 miles north of Highway 56 without leaving any physical trace of its passage through the rough desert terrain. Could the girls have somehow escaped into another dimension? Alberta, Canada. Sasquatch. I was about 18 at the time. It seems weird saying this happened 20 years ago. I still remember this day. I was camping at the time with my boyfriend. We were in Nordegg, Alberta, Canada. As we were driving back from our camping trip, we decided to stop on the side of the road. There was a little area where you could pull over in your vehicle. For whatever reason, we got out of the vehicle and proceeded to walk into the bush through a trail. It was a really beautiful day. We were avid hikers, and walking into the bush was second nature. I would say probably about 30 feet in, I saw a staircase. It was attached to an old house. Knowing now, from what I've read, you are not supposed to climb any staircases if seen in the forest. I climbed it and could see all around in the bush. While I was on the staircase, stones were being thrown at me. I looked around and told my boyfriend, who was down below, to stop throwing rocks at me. He said he wasn't throwing anything at me. As I came down the steps, I started to have an overwhelming feeling of fear. I then smelled a strong, foul odor. One additional rock came flying at me and hit me in the back. I knew that it wasn't my boyfriend. I can't really explain what happened next, but I saw a distorted area. It seemed fuzzy, almost like moving water in a small section near some trees. I instinctively knew that we needed to get out of there. I didn't see any creatures, but I just knew something was there and that we needed to run. We both quickly began running through the forest back to the car. Once we arrived at the car, we quickly got in. My boyfriend told me that he didn't want to scare me but that he had seen a man-like figure before we started to run. He didn't think it was human. We both at the time chalked it up to being supernatural, but recently I saw him on Facebook and reached out. Both of us married now and talked about that experience. He told me he was sure it was a Sasquatch. The man he saw had black-brown hair but looked distorted. He never forgot what happened. I just remember how horrid the stench was. In 1997, at the age of 28, my then boyfriend and I resided in a remote village in Lincolnshire, England. He had a job where he worked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I was working in a bar, so I would take him to and from work so I could get myself to work with the one car we shared. It's probably worth mentioning that the car was brand new. It had something crazy like 18 miles on the clock when we got it. I wanted something newer than the car we had before because I didn't like the idea of being stranded down a dark country lane if the old car decided to shit itself when I was driving alone. One morning I was driving along the little road. It was about 5:30 a.m., and the sun was just peeking out on the horizon, and the sky was completely cloudless. I slowed down to watch it as I often did, not paying much attention to the trees as they were in a row that ran down the side of the field so they were never in the way of the view. In my peripheral I thought I saw something move amongst the skinny trees, so I stopped the car completely thinking it might be a deer or something interesting like that. I waited for a few seconds and nothing happened, so I was just about to restart the car when I saw two of the trees walking out of the lineup. I say trees, but I don't have a clue what they actually were. Remember, this was a long time before the internet and the Slender Man and all the tales and superstition, etc. I was literally frozen to the spot with fear. Two tall things walked out of the line of trees and started walking over to me. I was about 50 to 60 yards away from them, and the only thing I could describe them as were oversized stick insects. They had two long legs and two long arms that almost touched the ground, and I'd say the tallest one must have been easily 12 feet tall, the smaller one maybe 10. They walked in a fluid motion, as if they were wading through treacle, like long hair would glide through water. It was just slow and graceful. When my brain finally kicked into flight mode, I started my car and glanced over to see how close they had gotten, all the while I was putting my car into gear and started it moving. The tallest one slowly lifted his arm up, like a silk scarf gliding through light wind, and pointed it at me. My car instantly stalled. The dashboard warning lights were all on, all of them lit up, and at the same time I got the worst pain in my face, mainly my jaw, but it made me scream out in agony, and I almost blacked out. With the pain debilitating me, I knew I needed to get away, fast. I was so terrified that the car wouldn't start again because all the lights were still on, so I turned the engine entirely off, and thankfully it started again, and I drove like a madwoman to get out of sight. All the time my face/jaw was burning, and when I got to my ex's work, he gave me a bottle of water to cool me down, but it didn't do much to help, and for weeks my mouth felt like I had chewed on poison ivy, my jaw feeling like I had an abscess under each molar. I needed to see a dentist, and I knew that, but explaining what happened would have made me feel stupid, so I put it off. I had 3 amalgam fillings, all in my lower molars, and once the worst of the pain had gone, a couple of months later, I couldn't put anything metal in my mouth without getting a shock, like licking a battery shock, so I was eating with plastic cutlery all the time and decided to give in and see if the dentist would change the fillings to ceramic ones. The dentist looked in my mouth and asked what had happened to my teeth. I played it off casually and asked why. My fillings looked like little balls of mercury, so I explained the car ride, etc., and he said that my fillings looked like they had melted and pooled into smooth, rounded metal balls. Every word of this is true. I don't mind banter or questions, but please don't be mean. It's taken a lot for me to tell my story to you all. Thanks. Potentially first sighting in Hawaii. Quick disclaimer, like many sightings, I don't have any evidence, so I feel obligated to say take this with a grain of salt because, as confident as I am that I saw something, I have to be fair and acknowledge that I could be mistaken. Anyways, this story is also a few months old, and I'm only just now posting it because I wasn't aware of the term crawler/this community until last night. I was driving back home with some friends after a little concert, roughly 1 to 2 a.m. at this point. We were on a stretch of road heavily surrounded by forest, pretty much in the middle of nowhere, besides a few hiking trails and waterfall locations nearby. As we were going down the road, we caught something in the headlights. I got freaked out at first because I thought it was a naked man just crouching in the middle of the road. We definitely have our fair share of weird people in that area and even the occasional crackhead, but the freaky part was that he/it pretty much galloped across the street and jumped in the air, clearing over the tall grass on the side of the road, and it took all of 2 to 3 steps to do so. Nothing an elite athlete could even come close to replicating. It was a light pink fleshy color with a humanoid shape, but the proportions for the torso and limbs were a little longer. It turned its head in the direction it was running, and its head shape and eye placement were definitely not deer-like. I don't know what I saw that night, but maybe this community is a step in the right direction to find out. Let me know what y'all think, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And no, I wasn't under any influence. The old woman on Highway 37. We were on a big, huge road trip. I live in Alaska here in Southeast Alaska, and the only way to get, if you want to drive down to the States, you have to go through Canada. You have to take a ferry from here. There's no way to drive into where I live. Out here in Juneau in Southeast Alaska is like our own little town. You have to take a ferry to get to a road system that goes in there. Anyway, I was on my way down to Seattle to pick up a car that I was going to turn into a taxi and bring it back up here. It was a 2-day trip thing, right? We went down on a plane and came back in the car that we bought, and 4 or 5 hours before we would get to the place in the Yukon that we were going to cross in the ferry to get back to Alaska, we stopped the car at this gas station in this place called Cassiar Highway, Highway 37. People who have made this trip know where this is. It was a desolate place. So we fuel up the vehicle. We had an extra tank. It was a police car, so it had an extra tank. So we're about an hour and a half into the road again, and it was just like desolate, and we see this haggy old frumpy lady along the road. You know the stories you would tell about the old hag? It's that kind of thought. She's staring at our car. There is nobody else on the road. We were like, she really creeped us out. Okay, now, 5 hours down, I swear to God, there she is again. There's no way she could have gotten in front of our car. There's no way she could have gotten down the road where she was. There she was again. Same exact lady. Same exact clothes and everything. Believe me, we soiled our pants. What do you think of that? What is the explanation? Don't take shortcuts. I'm a female. When I was 16, I lived in the Valley area of Los Angeles. This was many years ago. As I explained in an earlier story, at this time, the best part of my week was Saturday nights, when I would meet my friends at our beloved under 21 nightclub to dance the night away. The vast majority of the time I'd have to get a ride there and back. I didn't have my own car until a couple years later, when I was in college. But occasionally a family friend would lend me his car, and on one of these Saturday nights he did. I felt so independent and free to be able to take myself to the club and leave when I wanted. On the night of this story, I drove to the club and had a typically great time, dancing with my group of friends to music like Prince and Earth, Wind and Fire. At the end of the night, I got into my borrowed car and headed toward home. In case you don't know, the San Fernando Valley is made up of many suburban towns. None are really small, and some are very nice. And as you'd expect, some are less nice, with higher crime. I lived with my family in a medium town in the northern part of the valley. It was neither very nice nor very bad, with medium homes on mostly respectably, if not professionally manicured, lawns. And being the greater Los Angeles area, there were many differing routes I could take to get home, whether freeways, highways, or city streets. It was after midnight at this time, but most routes that I could take would still be bustling on a Saturday night. I'd had my fill of loud music, laughter, and chattering voices, so I opted for a quieter route home. I took some busy streets, then veered into some quiet neighborhoods that would take me home. If I drove through some quiet, house-lined streets, I'd get home a little faster, and I was tired. GPS hadn't been invented at this time, nor even cell phones, so I had to rely on maps or just knowing the chosen route. I'd heard bad things about a town called Pacoma, but I'd only been through it during the day, maybe once. Still, I knew how to get through to shave a few minutes off my time. And besides, being someone used to walking or taking buses, I felt blissfully, perfectly safe now in a well-running car with gas in the tank. I was safer at this moment than at almost any other time. At least, that's what I believed. Still, I was a teenage girl alone after midnight in an area I was unfamiliar with and naive enough to think nothing bad could happen to me in a locked car. I entered a residential street in Tacoma and only had to go a couple blocks to get to the next town, then to my own. As I slowly drove down a dark, quiet avenue of modest homes, there were street lights illuminating the unknown. This also helped with my feeling of invincibility. As I smiled to myself at this, I started to notice a few people walking down the street toward me. At first I didn't give it much notice. My left turn out of Tacoma was coming up just ahead anyway, but as they got closer, I very quickly realized it wasn't just a few people, it was a gang of approximately 12 to 15 men. And they weren't casually walking down the sidewalk, they were aggressively running down the middle of the street. And right toward me. I suddenly had to slow to almost a stop so as not to hit anyone, and this is when they all got a real good look at me. Looks, which turned instantly more excited and animated as they all realized I was just a young girl alone. Many exchanged smiling glances between them, and others were whooping, whistling, and calling out things to me. Smoothly, effortlessly, as if they'd rehearsed ahead of time, several of them stopped me completely by standing right in front of my car, even putting hands on the hood, as others walked around to my driver and passenger doors and pulled at the handles to open the doors. I didn't always lock the doors when I drove, and cars didn't have auto door locks back then. But I was thanking God that I'd had the foresight to do so on this night. Of course it all happened very fast, but in my shock and terror it felt like slow motion, so quickly adjusting my mind from carefree, to possibly being abducted or worse by this large group of men. They had me trapped, I couldn't drive forward nor reverse out of there because at this time the car was completely surrounded by men. And as a couple of guys picked up sticks or other objects to try to bust in my windows, I knew I had to think clearly and act fast. I did the only thing I could think of. I started driving forward. Having blocked my car completely, I could see the surprise on some of their faces as they knew they had to move out of my way or risk being run over. I'd immediately decided that if they didn't move, I would run them over. All the men standing in front of my car quickly jumped out of the way, and I sped up as I took the left turn out of Tacoma. I did make it home safely, but my heart didn't stop beating out of my chest for the rest of the night. Of course I thought about it for a long time after as well. I felt proud of the way I'd handled the situation, but I kept running through possibilities for what I could have done differently. What if they didn't get out of the way, and I actually hit a couple people with the car? How would I have lived with myself? Should I just have sat in place and honked the horn to hopefully wake up people in the homes around me? What if one of the men had pointed a gun at me? I'm thrilled that it turned out the way that it did, but it could have turned out so much worse. So, I hope we'll all keep in mind that we're not quite invincible inside a car, no matter how cozy even heated leather seats may make us feel. Dark, quiet shortcuts are not a good idea, especially at night. And always drive with your doors locked. So Tacoma gang that tried to grab and do who knows what to a teenage girl driving alone late one Saturday night. It's been a long time since then, and I'm very glad I didn't meet any of you ever again. I'm partially new to this type of entity, but by the recounts and descriptions I've heard, it sounds pretty similar. Anyways, I was out with some friends I'm no longer friends with, and we were just exploring with them at some random side road off the highway around the Everglades at this water canal maintenance place. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but they're everywhere in Florida. Actually, I just looked it up. They're called weirs, they measure water discharge. I also should mention all my weird instances and paranormal shit would always spike when our hangouts would get into it, like when we would be getting even closer. Anyhow, we were just exploring, and we came back from walking along the canal, and we went to the snack spot. We had to cross a little gate to get to this bridge lookout thing overlooking the lake that the canal bleeds into. So I walked ahead to just enjoy the view, and my girlfriend is behind me, following. When I got to the end of the lookout, I'm just watching this, what my brain had registered it as in that moment, this big ass white Great Dane. And I was like, oh, hey, look, there's a dog. And then my girlfriend was like, oh, shoot where? And then started ducking whistling at it because it was barking as well. Let me explain a little more. I was looking at the lake, and after the lake ends there is a pretty big field and some bushes. To the right of me was the fence because there's a road right next to it. We thought it was some trucker dog that he let out to pee because where we parked was a piece of road like a landing right next to the main road, and it reeked of straight piss, so lots of people stopped there. But we were the only people there at the time. On to what it did, it almost looked like a dog with zoomies, but it was bigger, so it moved a little slower. Man, it was just out of place, and the strides were big too. It ran back and forth in a circle and then ran behind a bush and was gone. I was like, WTF, where'd it go, obviously, and it legit just went into nothing. I was actually gone. I told everyone else, but they just wanted to smoke, so me and my girlfriend were the only ones who saw it. It was just weird, and the location of it was even weirder because it wasn't in a too rural part of Florida, like 15 to 20 minutes from civilization, lol, nor was it a wooded area, so I just wasn't sure what to make of it. Let me know what you think. I just saw a small humanoid running on the side of the road. I was driving on a short stretch of elevated highway. Wurzbach Parkway if you know the city. Traveling northbound between lots of drunks in my city, and stranger things have happened. Nonetheless, I moved from the right lane to the left, just in case. As I approached, I became aware that this silhouette was not getting taller, as you would expect as your perception shifts. Instead, it stayed the same height. I estimate it's maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, based on the fact its head came to about the same height as the hood of my car. I slowed down to about 50 to 55 miles per hour and stared at the back of this thing, trying to make out details through my rain-soaked windshield. As soon as I got close enough for this thing to be fully in my headlights, it dropped down to all fours, as if it were trying to mimic an animal. I know this was not any animal I've seen. Its size was that of a medium-sized coyote, but it was running distinctly like a person attempting to run like an animal. Its hindquarters were raised up in the air, and I could clearly make out buttocks. And its legs kicked out sideways. If you've ever seen documentaries about feral children, it'll give you an idea of the gait that I am attempting to describe. The only thing is that no human I've seen could run on all fours at the speed this thing was going. The creature was entirely naked and oily, black, and smooth. The rain glistened off its skin with a shine like wet black marble or obsidian. I could make out muscle tone and everything as this thing clipped along. As it dropped to 2 legs, it lost some speed, either intentionally or just from the change in gait. It was running about the same pace as a person could sprint. I passed this thing, and it looks over its left shoulder towards me. Its face was flat, with a flat, wide nose. It had big eyes. I could see the whites and dilated dark pupils. There was no eye shine, which I think is unusual, just those eyes against the black of its skin. Though it never looked directly in my headlight beams, so that may be inconsequential. It opened its mouth at one point as it was looking at me as it passed. Its teeth were flat and white like a human's but with larger and more prominent canines. It had hands and feet like a person. I couldn't make out any genitalia, but it was distinctly male in its general appearance. It had what could best be described as a swimmer's build. Its body was proportionate to that of any other human, just scaled down. No crazy long limbs or anything like that. I did fumble with my phone with the intent to try and take a photo. But to be honest, I was so enamored and excited and trying to take in as much detail as possible while driving on a dark, rainy road. I also didn't think a photo would show much because of the dark, rain, and the glass of my car windows. But now I'm seriously thinking of getting a dash cam. I hope that the car a ways behind me saw this thing. It was pretty obvious. I hope I've provided enough detail for an accurate report. I have no idea what I just saw. But I'm glad I saw it. It didn't seem malicious. It looked scared, like it was not happy to be up there and just wanted to get off the highway. I got the very distinct impression that the only reason it dropped to all fours was in an attempt to mimic an animal and draw less attention to itself. He didn't have far to go till the exit, but there's a well-lit gas station and intersection there. Aside from a few apartment buildings and scattered industrial areas, the only other stuff along this stretch is a small amusement park and the airport. There is an old abandoned concrete plant in the area next to the highway. Again, if you're local to the area, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. That was my first thought as to where it could have come from. It was heading away from this though and towards a populated area, so it doesn't make much sense. I'm still just floored that I saw this thing. The time I was driving home and saw someone on the side of the road. I live in a super residential, suburban area a little east of Buffalo, New York. I was driving home one night about 1 a.m. and was on my street, which is only a bunch of ranch houses, no other buildings, when I was about 8 houses down from my driveway. I go slow because people in my neighborhood leave food out for deer, and I know the one day I go speed limit I'm going to crack into one. Anyways, I'm rambling but just trying to give background and build setting, as they say. On the side of the road to my left, the driver's side, I see something lying right at the side of the road. It wasn't garbage night, and anyway, we have those trash cans provided by the town. I slow down. At that point, I'm maybe 8 feet away, and I'm shocked because it looks like a person laying there. I turn on my high beams and put my hand on the door handle. I'm about to open it. In the darkness with the headlights, I can't make out a ton of detail, but it's definitely a person laying there. I see what is likely a white shirt and what seems like red on it. I'm starting to open the door when I get this feeling that I just have not encountered before. I'm not saying it to build tension. I mean, I was going to open my door and get out to help, thinking it was a hit and run, and I'm one to do that risky Good Samaritan shit without second thought usually. Instead, I sat back, grabbed my phone, and floored it to my driveway, which was 10 seconds away anyway. Also, I was driving with an expired, suspended license, and I didn't want drama to be honest or allegations that I hit this person if it was indeed a hit and run, even if there would be no damage to my vehicle. I'm standing in the driveway with 911 going through and walking towards the sidewalk and in the direction of where I saw this person when they stand up and turn to face me. I'm being transferred to a dispatcher at this moment, and I've walked about 2 houses down towards this person at this point, but am on the other side of the street. The dispatcher comes on as this person begins running in my direction, on the other side of the street. I state my location, what is happening, and am running back towards my house, but I didn't like not seeing what this person was doing as I'm turned and running and try to walk, skip backwards, whatever. From my driveway, I see this person stop. They went towards me, maybe 3 houses, stagger around in circles, and stumble across the street, but they don't stop on the sidewalk, they just walked into a random yard, and from my distance, it was difficult to discern which, and they disappeared. I explained this all to the dispatcher and that I didn't know what house, if they were going home, breaking in, cutting through a yard, or what the hell ever. They said someone was en route. I was too frantic to note the time I called and when an officer came slowly down the street with his high beams on. I signaled for them, and they pulled up, thinking I was the person reported. I explained I was the one who witnessed the situation and explained where I saw the person go. He seemed to treat it as a prank at first until I told him the direction I saw the person go, then he seemed to change his attitude and made a no-confirming statement about thinking he knew what it was about and sped off. I live a few blocks from a large apartment complex that deals in some shenanigans at times, and he went off in that direction. I never figured out what happened, but it creeped the shit out of me more than any other situation I've been in, and I've done a lot of UE type stuff, been through major addiction shit, clean now and wasn't using any substance when this occurred, and also worked on a medical examiner contract for removing the deceased, so I'm not usually shaken. It was summer 2015-ish. Over the years, the exact date has gotten foggy, and I hope that doesn't take away from the experience. Skinwalker. An Army National Guard buddy of mine told me his Skinwalker story. He has only told a handful of us that are close friends with him, so I'll share it as best as I can remember. I'll refer to him as John for the story. This happened in the West Desert of Utah. It's a huge section of desert land that has mountain ranges and valleys stretching all the way to California. Between the Nevada border and our town in Utah, there are a few of these mountain ranges and valleys, and even though it's the desert, it has some incredible landscape. Lake Bonneville had left behind seashells that you can find close to the tops of these mountains that are around 10,000 to 12,000 feet in elevation, and there are slot canyons coming down of the mountains and into the valleys caused by flash floods. I personally have spent a lot of time with my dad and siblings out in the desert exploring old mines and caves in this area. There is literally nothing around for 100 miles once you get out of it. When John was in high school, he and his buddies went out to the desert and wanted to explore some of the slot canyons. These ones are in the clay dirt just at the foothills and not in the red rock like you see in the national parks of Utah. Since there isn't any good way to get down into them, they built an anchor point for the back of a truck where they could tie someone off and lower him in and then also be able to climb the rope back up and out once they were done. Now since the canyon was in the clay dirt, each time it flash floods, the rain would carve out the walls of the canyon so they are not straight up and down, so as you go down, the wall gets further and further away from you the deeper you go. These canyons are not very deep, by the way, maybe 30 to 40 feet deep. Sometimes the rain would carve out little side caves in the walls so you couldn't reach them from ground level, and this is what they wanted to check out to see how deep these side caves went and where they lead out. So they all had a plan on how to get down into the canyon, and they went out there to make it happen. This was not at night, by the way, it was daytime. Where they were going to enter from, they could only get the one vehicle, the other had to park further up and on the road, so they only took the one truck with the anchor point down to the access point just above the side cave they wanted to explore. They get all set up, and John's friend is going down first. He gets tied off and was super pumped to get down there. He rappels off the side, and before too long his feet don't touch the wall anymore because it's been cut away, so he is just free hanging, and John and his friends are lowering him down. Once he gets directly across from the entrance, he starts swinging over to get himself into the opening and on the ledge. John said he was excited and making cheering noises as he swung, but suddenly he went silent for a few swing strokes and then started screaming to John and the others to get him the hell up. John said that as all good friends do, when your buddy asks for something, you do the opposite, and that's just how their group always acted. but in this case they knew by his tone that he was not playing around and desperately wanted out of there, so they all pulled him up as quick as they could. When hit the top, he scrambled to get away from the edge and was so scared he was able to convince everyone that they all needed to leave immediately, and this had John and the rest of the group spooked as well, so they all piled in the one truck and headed up to the road where the other vehicle was parked. On the way his friend explained what happened. As he was swinging to get closer to the cave entrance, he would swing from the sunlight into the shadow, which was affecting his vision, and on top of that, the cave entrance was just dark, but as he was swinging to get closer, he started to make out the outline of a figure standing just inside the cave. Once he realized what he saw, it started moving toward him, and he got a better look at it. It looked just like a man but was covered in mud. The exact mud that would have been from the clay all around them if it were wet. Note, in the desert it does not rain that often and it was very dry when they were doing this. As the figure moved toward him, he saw it raise its arms and reach out for him, and at the same time it opened its eyes. He said they were just white eyes with no pupil. That's when he started screaming to get pulled up. John said they were all spooked by him being completely terrified because he was not one to chicken out about anything. When they got back to the road and the other vehicle, John said that the other vehicle was covered in muddy handprints. Again, it was summertime in the desert. No mud anywhere. John's story creeped me out for sure. A benefit of the National Guard is that most of us are from the same area, meaning we all like the same things, so it's easy to get along with each other, and most of us have been to the same places as everyone else, so it's easy to picture yourself in that story. Now I probably will not be going out to that spot again. It was about 2 a.m. one night in September. The woods surround our house, situated about 25 minutes out of town in northern British Columbia, Canada. Due to the lack of traffic on the road, we typically pull out of the driveway before turning on our lights. Why? I dunno. Weird habit. We both would do it, Lamau, not anymore, lights on immediately. So I'm driving. I pull out to go left down the road and turn on the high beams. Then we see it. On the road is this weird, hairless, pale humanoid creature crouching in the middle of the road. It almost seemed to be glowing, but that was probably because it was such a pale white and I hadn't turned off my high beams. It whipped its head at us, as if it were surprised by our lights turning on. After a second, it shambles across the rest of the road in jerky movements and down into the ditch, which was about 3 feet deep. But that's not it. We both watched as it went down the ditch, turning around to face us. And it stood up on its back legs, exactly like a human but not quite. Except it stood over 5 feet higher than the ditch, taller than our car at the time. And remember, the ditch is already 3 feet deep, so this creature was over 7 feet tall. It looked aggressive, hunched at the shoulders and leaning forward slightly as if to look at the car. And I swear I made eye contact with it. No. It wasn't observing us as we passed. It wasn't looking at the car. It was looking through the window, and it was looking right at me. Whatever it was intelligent and knew that the car wasn't moving itself. It knew we were inside. I drove so slowly, turning my head and keeping eye contact with it as we drove past, and it did the same, craning its neck to watch me leave. My boyfriend couldn't see it past me at that point. Eventually, it's out of my vision, and I look back at the road. We are both completely silent. I'm driving less than 10 kilometers an hour, having taken my foot off the gas when I saw something in the road. To this day I don't really tell people because the people I tell just laugh it off or try to explain it as an albino starving bear or something. Now, this year his parents were visiting just before winter hit. They have a dog. Me and his mom were having a smoke on the deck, which is about 6 feet off the ground. It's dusk. Not much light. We were on the left side of the deck, the same side we turn on the road to go to town. You can see the patch of wood where the creature would have been before, so this instance happened in the same little area. I hear a bunch of cracking twigs just as the dog goes nuts. He is a small boy, so we were surprised when he almost jumped off the deck to run in the woods. My boyfriend comes out just in time, and we see, just beyond some trees so it's obscured, a tall, lanky white form. But we couldn't see anything else definitive, and his mom has terrible eyesight and didn't have glasses. I knew it was the same creature. I got this twisting feeling in my gut. I decided to share it here because, if anything, at least some people will believe me. We don't leave our house at night. Perhaps it's strange, but I'm eager to experience it once more. There's such a huge difference, man. I used to think, wow, these stories are cool. I so believe in them. It was nothing compared to the odd terror I felt when I made eye contact with something I'm positive is not natural. Thanks for listening. I hope someone finds this as interesting as me because I literally think about it every single day, and it can actually bring me to tears because it scares me so much. The Black Dog. My life is filled with unusual encounters and experiences, and it's rather therapeutic to share them here. As if by sharing them I can find some sort of closure and hear what others can compare them with, and it's nice. It's reassuring. Since this has happened to more than just me, and I hear people talk about these rare moments, I want to share mine. This takes place a few winters back, and it follows a series of strange events that had been occurring on my route home from work. Whether it's connected or not, I really can't say, but I feel there's something to be said about the timing. Now the events of the road experience still happen, but this one only once. It snows where I live a lot, my state is known for it. But that winter had been relatively mild, with only a few heavy snowfalls, this being a very light snowfall that evening with fresh powder. I had rushed home, something I do often, because of my route and also because I was still working with my puppy for bathroom time. Now it's important to say that where I live is a very secluded village that no one knows is there unless you live there or no one who does. Apart from the inhabitants that know everyone and their second cousin, after 8 at night, there is literally no one out. It's so quiet you can hear the soft sound of snow falling even. It's crazy, but super peaceful from the city I work in, and my village has its own little strange quirks I might talk about on here someday, but not now. This is important because when it snows, there is no traffic, and there is one large light near my home that illuminates most of the street by the woods, so you can clearly see everything, especially on a winter night. I had taken my dog out to do his business and grabbed my shovel from my car because I thought I would need it in the morning, and I did. My puppy stood alert on his leash as I got the shovel and closed the door, and I felt like something was there, but I hadn't seen anything. As I closed the door of my car, I could smell something, like eggs or smoke, and I remember wondering who was making eggs at nearly midnight. When I closed the door, I had dropped my keys in the snow, and I had to dig them out since the snow was light but had layered already. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something standing by my car rear, and my dog, who is very hyper around people and other animals, sat down in the snow and just stared behind me. I could smell that egg smell even stronger, and I felt all the hairs on my neck stand on end. I looked, still in my crouched position, and I tell you now, I felt nothing. No fear. No panic. Nothing like what I saw. It was like everything stopped, like the snow wasn't even falling. Less than 3 feet from us stood a massive black dog like I had never seen. It was large and gangly, but looked completely of muscle. It stood there, looking at us with the blackest eyes I had ever seen in my life. It felt like we stared at each other for hours. Its hot breath was like smoke in the cold air, and it never blinks. It may have felt like hours, but it was probably only a matter of seconds. It looked from me and then to my dog, and I shit you, not my dog, came over and sat by my foot and just stared at it again. The dog looked at me and then turned and started walking down the street. My thoughts came back, and I stood up, following around the car to see where it was going. Wondering if maybe a neighbor had gotten a new dog or something, even though everything in my body just said to go inside right then and there. I looked down the street, the dog was gone. I mean, nowhere. Even if it had run, I still would have been able to see it, or at least a trail. There were no footprints in the snow, nothing, and the snow wasn't falling fast, and my dog's prints were clearly visible, and he's a small and very light puppy. That dog and its size would have made prints no problem. I remember feeling this sensation of fingers up my spine, and I ran inside with my dog, and I just sat there shaking. A few weeks later and asking around, no one owned or had seen such a dog before. I began looking into it. I was already aware of the black dog lore, but I didn't find anything more than I already knew. However, it didn't stop there. I had talked to my friend about the dog I'd see and the lack of prints, the feeling, and she had frozen the moment I said black dog. She lives far from me in another small town, and she stopped me and recanted a very similar tale of her from weeks prior. How she had gone outside to get something from her vehicle and it was lightly snowing near the woods on her property, that her cat, who hated snow, had come with her and just sat there. How she'd felt like something was there, and when she looked, a dog similar to what I described just stood there. She had felt nothing, as if everything had stopped. That the dog stepped towards her, and her cat got up and practically sat on her foot where she stood. That the dog took a step back and then left. There were no tracks, nothing, and she remembered the smell of smoke, but she had rushed in the house with her cat, shaking. It was later we found out, this had been the same night as we'd both seen it. I don't know what it means, and I haven't found any lore similar to this or stories besides her to go on. But I have this feeling that our pets did something for us that night, protected, bartered. I don't know. But thinking back, it was like, for me anyway, that my dog vouched for me with whatever this dog was, and that feeling has always made me both concerned and amazed. There is so much we don't know, and so much I honestly hope to never find out. but that's my experience, and I would love to hear if anyone else has heard of something like this or has had very similar situations. A glitch on a remote road. I'm from a small town where all there was to do as a teenager when you were bored was either sit at home or drive around. One night I decided to go for a drive, heading nowhere in particular. The town I'm from is in the Rocky Mountains, so it was fairly easy to drive 10 minutes and feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. During this particular night, I found myself on a remote dirt road. I was alone, listening to music and clearing my head. I remember how dark it was beyond my headlights, no glow from the moon. Although this road was remote, there were stop signs at intersections here and there. I hadn't seen any cars or otherwise for a while, but I was a good law-abiding citizen and stopped at the stop signs just in case. The further away from town I drove, the more I felt this strange feeling. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I was unnerved for some reason. In front of me was a blind hill, and I could see the glow of headlights behind it. Once I got to the top of the hill, I could see an intersection with a four-way stop and a car sitting at the stop sign. Once I pulled up and stopped, I was able to get a good look at them. I could see them through their windshield. It was a woman driving, and a man was in her passenger seat. Something was very off about them. They both weren't moving, her hands were on the steering wheel, but they were both starting straight forward, expressionless, not at me but past me. I'm not sure how long they had been sitting there before I pulled up, but I do know I stopped for far too long. I finally broke out of my trance-like state and kept driving. For some reason I kept telling myself not to look to my left as I passed their car, so I kept my eyes forward. I know what you're thinking, and honestly, at first I thought the same thing. Rationally, they could have been on drugs and zoned out or something. I thought that until I came across the next intersection, which was not too far away from where I saw them. This was definitely a different intersection, and the road is basically as straight as an arrow, no curves or corners, just various intersections with no houses around, and this was the main road of the area. And trust me when I say that there is no physical way that this car could have driven around a block or done anything without me seeing to end up where they now were. It was the exact same interaction. I pulled up to the stop sign, and there they were, already stopped at the stop sign, not moving, facing forward, and expressionless. The heavy feeling of uneasiness was weighing heavier than before. This was weird. There is no logical explanation for them to be where they were, and why were they just sitting there? Instead of driving past them again, I decided to turn right and find my way back home. The entire time I could see their headlights in my rear view mirror, just sitting there. They didn't turn to follow me or continue straight. I also want to say that I was a sober teenager, and I don't have any mental illness that would cause hallucinations. Has this happened before to anyone else? NPC theory? Thank you for listening, and please let me know what you think. So, about 3 hours ago, my girlfriend left to go pick up some food. She came back about 15 to 20 minutes later. And she was like, "I saw a monster at the park." At first I didn't believe her, but after a bit of questioning, she was serious. So we immediately got in the car, she put the food in the oven first so it wouldn't get cold, and drove over there. And there was nothing, of course. I was actually hoping there'd be Halloween decorations or something, but nope. We circled the park, and then I had her park across the street so I could go look at the spot she saw it in. Nothing. I don't even know what I was thinking I'd find, but I still wanted to look around. Again, nothing. It was grass, so not like there'd be footprints anyway. And yeah, that's pretty much it, but I'll describe what she described to me. She said she was driving, and she saw someone kind of hiding behind a tree, but poorly. Like obviously sticking out from that angle. But looking at it, she decided it wasn't actually a person, just kind of person-shaped. She described it as white, that's what drew her attention. She said it wasn't a color she'd expect to see. And she said it had glowing red eyes. I asked her if she meant reflective like a cat's or actually glowing. She said glowing. She described its fingers as pointy. She said it looked like it was watching the cars pass by on the street. She said it was kind of hunched over, so she couldn't be sure how tall it was, but she guessed around her height, 5 feet even, while in that position, probably taller fully upright. She was driving past, so she said she only saw it for about 4 to 5 seconds. Based on what I saw, there were 2 trees, maybe 4 feet apart, and they were approximately 30 feet from the road. I'm not particularly good at math or measurements, so those numbers could be off. And I don't know if this is relevant or not, but we're in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And yeah, that's it. I'd call myself a very amateur paranormal nerd. But I'm not claiming to be anything close to an expert. I have no idea what she saw, but it sounds like a crawler is a close match. And really, I know very little about these things. So yeah. I don't really think I'm trying to accomplish anything by posting this, Just putting this story out there. I'd love to hear any thoughts or theories on this. And general information would be good too. And yeah, that's my, or at least my girlfriend's, story. Back in 2007, my senior year of high school, I was driving myself and two other of my finest friends back to one of their homes after a basketball game. I distinctly remember it being a clear night with the stars out, no clouds or fog in sight. We had just exited the town and were a few miles out of town limits. As we continued to drive, we came to the apex of a particular hill. As we began our descent, we all noticed and commented on something we saw at the bottom of it that was very strange. We saw what looked like a giant ball of smoke, with a lot of these weird-looking tentacles around it. I don't have a good estimation of how big it was, but I know it was extremely large based on the size of it when we were a good distance away. It was stationary on the right side of the highway. The body of the thing was not moving around, but it did have that foggy appearance that made it seem like the tentacle-looking things were. We started to question ourselves as soon as we saw it, but the closer we got, the more we noticed that it was clear this was something out of the ordinary. As we got near it, something really unexpected happened. I want to say that when we got around 30 or so feet from it, this once stationary, condensed ball of smoke shot across the highway at an insane rate of speed. The acceleration of it was mind-boggling. As we were already questioning what it was when we first saw it, we began to yell in disbelief when it sped across the road. As we were continuing to freak out over what we saw, we eventually got to the path where that apparition-looking thing had crossed the highway. As soon as I went over that path, my cell phone vibrated. I was a bit startled, but I pulled my phone out while the other guys were discussing in bewilderment of what we had witnessed. I looked at the screen of my flip phone and noticed that I had received a voicemail, which was weird as I had a signal at the time and received no call. Even then, I figured it was just a voicemail from someone that had called me, and it went to voicemail for some reason. As they continued their conversation, I decided to listen to the voicemail to make sure it wasn't anything important, but in my mind, I was confused that I had just gotten a voicemail while I had the signal. I dialed my voicemail and began the message. To my disbelief, I had received like a 45-second, 1-minute message that was composed of this weird-sounding static with fluctuations. It didn't really sound like white noise from a TV. It's hard to describe it since it's been so long, but I remember it being extremely unsettling. I was aghast with what I just witnessed prior, and then getting that extremely odd voicemail as soon as I had crossed the path of the smoke thing made me start to act out in disbelief. The other guys didn't realize what had happened, but then I told them about the voicemail I just got. I let them listen to it as we continued to drive. Small town time loop? This happened to me about 2 or 3 years ago, and to this day it has to be one of the creepiest/weirdest things I've ever experienced that I have absolutely no explanation for. For context, I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my grandparents live in a small town roughly 80 miles to the northeast called Mesquite. There are 2 ways you can get to Mesquite from where we live. You can either take the main interstate and get there in just over an hour, or you can take the state route 169 around Lake Michigan for a more leisurely scenic drive that will take you right through 2 connected small towns in the middle of the Nevada desert, adding another hour or so to the drive. By this point we had already taken this route so many times we could do it with our eyes closed, and on top of that we always kept the GPS on to monitor traffic and our exact arrival time estimate. On this particular evening, we entered the first town of the 2 conjoined communities on the scenic route and continued down the same streets we always take passing through. Here's the part I can't explain. This route takes us right through the main street of the first town. Going down Main Street, you'll see a few landmarks that make it impossible to mistake for any other street as you're passing through, like the only McDonald's and major grocery store in a 40-mile radius. As we come to the end of Main Street and reach its natural left curve, we continue straight down over the small, white, tree-covered bridge and take the first right like always into the second of the 2 towns. Not only did we take the very first right that we always do, we know for a fact that we turned step in the correct spot because our GPS also registered it instead of recorrecting our route. Almost immediately, me and my mom both noticed that something was very off. Instead of being met with the usual sight of a road lined with palm trees, houses, and small pastures that normally make up the rest of the route, it was a very dark and desolate desert landscape. There were no lights or signs of civilization in any direction for what appeared to be miles, with the exception of the moon's glow outlining the distant mountains and the headlights from our vehicle. Our GPS became completely unresponsive at this point. We looked back and noticed that the main street of Overton and the bridge we had just crossed over a minute prior at most were nowhere in sight. Despite being unsettled, we decided to keep going forward for a few more minutes, recognizing that the mountains in front of us were still the same ones you'd see on this route that lie on the edge of Mesquite. All of a sudden the road became super bumpy and rough, unlike anything either of us had felt before when taking this route. We started dramatically bouncing all over the place. Right before my mom was going to flip around and go back, familiar lights appeared again, seemingly out of nowhere, directly in front of us, and just like that, the road was perfectly smooth again. Our sense of relief quickly turned into dread, however, when we realized we were at the start of the first town again. We followed the road past Main Street over the bridge, took the first right turn like always, and after being greeted by an unfamiliar bumpy road, were somehow teleported through space-time back to the very start of the town miles back after just about 5 minutes of driving. In shock, we tried to explain it away by rationalizing it, saying it was still the second town and we must have accidentally taken a weird route. We were quickly forced back into a state of pure silent shock as we began passing the landmarks of the unmistakable Main Street from the first town again. We looked at each other frozen in fear as we observed the GPS and the clocks on our phones reading the time it had been when we went down Main Street the first time. Again, we reached the end of Main Street and followed the road as it curved left over the same white bridge once again. Looking at each other one more time before we hesitantly took that first right turn, we both breathed a sigh of relief when we were greeted by the normal sight of homes, pasture, and palms down the road. We traveled the rest of the way to Mesquite as normal with no more unexplainable phenomena or weird occurrences for the remainder of our journey, which we spent attempting to rationalize in some way what we just experienced, only to come to the conclusion that there is no other possible explanation besides a time loop or vortex of some kind. We even attempted to find a rational explanation one more time by attempting to replicate it during the day the following week, but we were not only unable to replicate it, we found out that the road we turned down that night couldn't have existed because there was no right-hand turnoff after the bridge that didn't go through a residential area, much less loop us around back to the start of the first town. To this day and probably for the rest of my life, it will be the greatest glitch in the Matrix I have ever experienced, and if someone can provide any alternative and serious explanations, it would be much appreciated. Black Canyon City, Oz. When I was younger, I visited the Grand Canyon on weekends. A few-hour drive out of town to get some nature was nice. Between Phoenix and Grand Canyon City there is a small town called Black Canyon City. I felt like sharing this story, albeit quite boring. It has stuck with me throughout the years. The first experience/time I was by myself was late at night. I passed the Black Canyon City sign and was feeling hungry, so I figured maybe I'd stop and grab something. I made the turn towards what looked like a bar in the distance, some outdoor lights, but the further I went, the bar remained a fixed distance into the horizon. It looked like it was just 5 or 6 blocks away. I figured maybe it was the landscape playing tricks on me or an optical illusion, but it just never got closer. I started to panic a little bit after probably just a minute or so and looked in my rear view, and I could still see what I thought was the back of the Black Canyon City sign and the highway, like a half a block behind me. Like I was driving on a treadmill. I don't know how to better explain. I ended up having a lost time situation. I've never fallen asleep at the wheel, and I have a lot of difficulty sleeping in general, but I understand the skepticism of it being late and weird dreamlike things happening. I turned around, and it was 2 a.m., and I was on the highway, about a quarter mile from Black Canyon City. I lost around 6 or 7 hours. I guess I rationalized it, thinking I had made some turns and that my clock wasn't right. When I realized the clock was right, I figured maybe I had stayed far later than I thought. It wasn't until later that I remembered that I had begun to leave the Grand Canyon around sundown, per usual, and couldn't make sense of the time. The second I went with my ex-girlfriend to the Grand Canyon hike on the weekend again, she was teasing me about my weird experience in Black Canyon City as I mentioned it on the way up. I basically said I got off the exit and drove towards what I thought was a bar to maybe grab some food, but the landscape made it look way closer than it was, and I got lost, never got there, and somehow lost like 6 hours. On the way back, we get off the exit and head towards the lit-up bar, but this time, we make it to the bar. I don't think it was the same bar simply because we made a few turns shortly after the exit. Anyways, they didn't serve food, neither of us are big drinkers, and they were playing very, very loud music. Not much else in sight. So we left. The way we came. We are driving back to Phoenix. Nothing happens. About a half hour later, just estimating based on highway speed some 35 miles later, we see the same Black Canyon City sign, and we are again approaching Black Canyon City. No way we drove in a loop, no way I didn't make a right into town and backtrack exactly the way I came. There was only the one on/off ramp, very small town. The city isn't 35 miles long, you cannot make a left on the divided highway there. Anyway, now she is freaking out. It was 5 hours later, around 2 a.m. We never really spoke of it again. So, anyone from Black Canyon City? WTF? Lost in the woods on a car trip with my family. It was a random day. My family and I had a trip planned out to go somewhere far from home. Just to go to a place in the Philippines called Dahilayan Buktanon Park. While on the way, we used a GPS tracker to reach our destination. None of us were aware that the GPS may not be accurate. We followed the route. My uncle was driving the car. It was a Fortune car, big enough to fit many people inside. As we got somewhere, it was still sunset. And we were going up a hill, surrounded by tall trees. I fell asleep for a while because I was already exhausted from all the journey we went through. But I soon woke up from my mother's voice saying, "Dong pog bantay kay mahalog ta." It's in Cebu. It meant be careful. We're going to fall off. I looked around the car window. We were on top of a hill. The sides of the road being so thin and tight. One wrong turn and we would all come crashing down. My cousins and I were at the back of the car. We stayed quiet because we knew not to panic in situations like these. But my mom was the only one panicking. As we went further, my uncle drove slowly, and thankfully we didn't fall off and managed to find an area where we could make a U-turn. It was still on the hill, but the area was wide enough. After making it back to the main road safely, we were all shaken. Scared. Time skip of hours driving. After that, it was already night. Nothing at sight. No lights, and it was nothingness. My family didn't follow the GPS this time. They used their memories because they used to be on that road before. We were going uphill again. I had no idea where it was, but all I saw was trees around the car and the quiet sound of the car wheels driving over the gravel. Then, at some point we stopped. I was confused, but it appeared that there was no continuation of the road ahead. Everyone in the car was quiet. My mother asked my uncle to check outside, and when they opened the car door, it was so cold. The wind was strong, and I heard the trees. It was spooky and sent a chill down my spine. My uncle closed the door as he turned on the front lights of the car. There was a line of people. Many of them. I don't have any idea what they were doing alone in the woods. It was so weird. After that, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I didn't eat all day because we were stranded in the woods. The next thing, I woke up, and we were already on the main road. We stopped by a 7-Eleven shop, and they bought hot dogs for my cousins and me to eat. All of us were starving and had no energy. This was the most experience that I almost died. I'm glad my family and I were safe. Just a reminder, if you want to go somewhere, you can't always trust the GPS or the maps because the routes are outdated. Sasquatch on the plains. I live in a very rural area on the American Great Plains. It's a small farming town with not much else but expanses of pretty much every crop you'd expect that could live in this semi-arid land. It's nuzzled up close to a large valley, with fertile soil and a small creek that runs through it. An interstate highway runs 3 to 4 miles south of town, and that's about the only paved road apart from city streets for 10 or maybe 15 miles from here. It's a peaceful little place with not much else to do but work the fields from dawn until dusk. For details on myself, I'm a 16-year-old male and roughly 6 feet 1 inch and close to 160 pounds, and I play as our football team's running back. Having freshly gotten my license and wanting to join the fun of going back and forth in the field for 14 hours a day, I asked a local farmer for a job. It was mid-planting season, so he set me to work rock picking and land rolling. For anyone who doesn't know much about farming, rocks can cause problems to the combine and their headers during harvest. So to deal with these rocks, farmers use machines called a rock picker and land roller. The rock picker is quite a simple contraption. A wedge-like scooper is hydraulically dropped down to pick a rock up, and a large reel, much like on a combine header, sweeps it into a tank on the rock picker. It doesn't manage to get all the rocks and leaves the little ones behind. A land roller is just a large, heavy steel drum that is pulled behind a tractor and used to push those rocks back down in the soil, making it out of the way of the combine header. So the farmer gave me the directions to my first field, so I drove the small rock-picking tractor to the field and got to work. This field was right on the edge of the valley, and I could overlook the lush grazing lands and the freshly planted fertile soil below me. Although not many trees were present around town or abound most of the countryside, the walls of the valley were full of them. Large poplars and cottonwood trees covered the small ponds and sloughs not far from the edge. The trees stretched all along the valley edge as far as you could see. As I was scooping up some rocks on a dried-up stream bed, I noticed a doe and a small, freshly born fawn run off from across the field. I figured the loud noise the engine was making scared them off, but I was wondering why the fawn had run. Fawns usually hide in the tall grass and lay down silently, hiding from their predators. I thought that was strange, but carried on. Rounding the field edge near where I saw them run off, I saw a large bedding location. I figured it could be from a moose, which we occasionally find in the area. That would explain why the deer ran off, but there was no moose to be seen. I circled around again to pick up another rock that I could have sworn wasn't there before. Then, to my surprise, I saw one land next to me. It came from the nearby trees. That freaked me out already, so I turned the tractor towards the forest and turned on the night beams and flashers, even though it was day. The area under the tree canopy was dark, but I put a few thousand lumens directly where the rock came from. To my horror, I saw a crouched figure only 20 to 30 feet away. It was exactly the description you hear on those cheesy shows on TV or those fake eyewitness accounts about Bigfoot. Just this was so real. I could only see from its mid-chest up that its face had dark, grayish-brown hair around its head and face, but towards the chest its hair color changed to a more orange or red-brown. Its face was squished in, eyes a seemingly gentle brown hazelnut color. Its mouth was remarkably human, but more ape-like, nose squished in, and head pointed. It was so wide and muscular and big. It looked at me with its tender eyes. It gave me a sense of caring or softness. In its eyes I could also see its power. It was like he knew how large he was and that he was the top predator, but was respectful and had no ill intent. I sat and watched it, until finally it got up and swiftly moved through the brush. I finished that field afterwards with no fear but curiosity. I left and haven't told anyone, but now. It was probably 2 years ago. Maybe just under 2 years ago, 2013. I just started driving trucks. Just got my truck after being trained and everything. I drove from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Cherokee, Alabama. I'd been driving. I didn't drive straight through, but I got up early this one day to get my load there on time, and I was taking this load of paper, scrap paper, to Cherokee, Alabama, to a plant that makes Kleenex down in Cherokee. So I had gotten up early to finish out my load so I could get there on time. I drove probably 8 hours or something like that. I got my load delivered, picked up an empty trailer, and got a hold of my dispatcher to find out what he wanted me to do next. He didn't have any work for me, so I said, I'm going to go lay down for a little while. So I went to a little truck stop that was just down the road. Took a nap. Got up and decided to have some lunch. I got some lunch, and while I was eating my lunch, I decided to get my next load, which was in Decatur, Alabama, which was probably an hour away or something like that from where I was in Cherokee. Maybe a little more or a little less, somewhere in that range. So I went to pull out on this road, and there was this big black truck, all lifted up, all jacked up, and everything, a pickup truck. So I thought I'd let him go first because he was moving. So when he passed, I pulled out, and I got the whole truck straightened out. I got probably, maybe, if I had to guess, 30 feet away from this. There's a big US highway down there in Alabama. There are 2 lanes going one way and 2 lanes going the other way, divided by medians between them and then trees. You're kind of driving through the woods. Trees on both sides of the road. If I had to guess, it was maybe 50 yards from the trees to the trees, maybe a little more. Something like that. I'm driving along, just getting the truck straightened out, seeing what's going on around me. All of a sudden, out of the woods to my right, this thing came running. And it was fast. Fast. I don't know what it was, but I know. It was fast. So fast that I couldn't really tell you what it was. But I tell you this, it made that clearing from the woods to the road, which I could tell you was a good-sized clearing. It made that clearing from the woods to the road take about, at most, 10 steps. That's how fast it was going. That's how big a stride it was taking, but anyway, it crossed out in front of the road and that big black truck in front of me. I don't even know if he knew that he hit it, but he hit it. Hit it right in the hip and turned it around, twisted it around, and it fell in ball on the shoulder. The guy didn't pay any attention to it. I was thinking, what the heck was that thing? I know what it looked like, but I didn't want to sound crazy. So I drove by it. My windows down because I was smoking. And so I'm slowing down to kind of look at it and see what it is. I'm looking out my window, and it's balled up in this ball. Whatever it was a big ball. This truck was jacked up, and it hit this thing in the hip, and it fell into a ball on the ground. When I drove by it, it wasn't dead, but it was mad. I couldn't see it. Like all I could see was its hair. I couldn't see it, but it was mad. You could hear it. Makes loud grunting noises, it was like pissed. I went, well, whatever. I was like, I think I just saw Bigfoot. Again, I don't know what it was, but swear to God, I don't know what it was. I was tired. I had laid down and slept for 3 hours. I had lunch, but it was like I just woke up. I had lunch before I left, so I wasn't crazy. This thing wasn't like big, enormous, like 7 or 8 feet tall, like when you think about Bigfoot being. He was probably 6 feet tall or whatever. He wasn't enormously large, but he was still big. You could see when I drove by. You could just see, loaded with muscle underneath all that hair. I got my load and drove for a little while. Got parked for the night, called Mrs. Smoke and Irishman. Told them about it. They were all in amazement. My mother said, "Why didn't you go back and take a picture of it?" Because I didn't know what it was, a bear? If it was a Bigfoot? I didn't know what it was. All I knew was that it was mad, and I wasn't going to figure out what it was in case it ripped me in half. Got home that weekend. We had a big party because my ex-sister-in-law had just graduated from nursing school. So we all went out to dinner. Me, my brother, my family, with her family, and everything. We're kind of close with her family, so I told her dad about it, and he said that was a bear. I've never seen a bear other than like at the zoo or on TV. So maybe it was a bear, but when I think of a bear, I don't think of a bear as running on its hind legs. When a bear gets up on its hind legs, it's more for an intimidation type thing. I see him taking a couple of steps, but I don't see them full out sprinting and running, and I always think of bears' hind legs, at least in my head, being little stubby kind of legs. This thing was fast, and it had big, huge, like normal people's legs, but it had big, long arms. It took that stride in like 10 steps before it crossed the road and then crossed the road in like 2. That's my story of Bigfoot. I don't know if it was Bigfoot. I don't know what it was. All I know is that it freaked me out. I told Mrs. Smoke and Irishman about it that night when I got parked. She looked it up, and there have been all kinds of sightings between and around Decatur, Alabama, so maybe it was Bigfoot. I don't know, but I thought it would be a cool story to share with you. I'm pretty sure I saw Bigfoot. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure. So that's my story of seeing Bigfoot, guys. You can think I'm crazy because I think I'm crazy. I don't really know what it was. All I knew was that it was big, it was fast, and when I passed it on the side of the road and it was all balled up, it was mad. That's all that I know. 4 days ago, I think I caught a sighting of a Squatch hitchhiking along Route 144 to Lancaster. Some context for you folks, I was staying with a friend in Renovo, let's call him James for now. I was only stopping by, I couldn't get a lift with James to Lancaster due to his uncle having a fall and him having to deal with it. I decided to hitchhike my way to Lancaster with a guy who was going to Harrisburg, so I essentially planned to get off midway through my journey and then go on to Lancaster, either way. Whilst I was going down Route 144, we were approaching near the Big Rock, I think if I remember correctly, and as we were about to follow down round into a corner, I could see what I'm pretty sure was a Sasquatch. I've always had some sort of belief there is something out there, people can't just be seeing nothing. The only other weird experience I've had prior is dogs barking at presumably nothing whilst on walks or in my backyard, but that's about it. As for the description of the creature I saw, the first thing I noticed was the side of the creature, as it was hurtling its way down into the tree-lined valley. It had a sort of stone gray or stone brown colored coat, with some regions being mismatched in terms of coloration, at least from what I could make out due to the dazed amount of light under the canopy near the road. The main feature that stood out to me was its height, which immediately made it clear to me it wasn't a person or bear, also due to it running down a slope with a decent amount of balance at a good speed. I think it was about like 8 feet tall. But again, it was pretty difficult to make a decent assertion on how big it actually was due to the time of day. From what I could make out on its head, it had an almost raised crest, like you see on gorillas, which was a slightly different shade of brown/gray compared to the rest of its body, and it didn't exactly have a neck to say, with its neck more so protruding into its stocky body, at least from what I could tell. I could only see it for around 5 to 6 seconds, and we had some distance between it whilst we were driving towards it, but as soon as it went down into the forest, there was little sight of it. Due to me not seeing its face head on, it was difficult to say what it looked like, but I remember it had a sort of snout to it, but not like a bear, sort of like a baboon, with shaggy hair around its head, which at points seemed to obscure the front of its face, but again, it was pretty difficult to tell. I can only describe its face like a baboon. Its snout didn't really seem to have a large amount of hair on it, though. I don't know if it had anything in its hands, I think it didn't, but the last thing I remember of it was hurtling its way down into the forest below. I'm pretty sure it was a Sasquatch, but I'm a little weirded out. If what I saw was a Squatch, then it pretty much differed from a lot of other types of Squatch people see. Do these creatures uniformly fit into one type of Bigfoot? Do they have multiple types of subspecies? I don't know. It's just all weird. So this is a story I've told to very few people due to it scaring me half to death, but it's coming up on a year since it happened, so figure might as well share. I was out west last year around late October/early November for a backpacking and hiking trip. Suffice to say I needed to clear my head, and this was part of a 2-month sabbatical I took from my home. During this time I lived primarily out of my car on the East Coast. For the portion of my vacation related to this story, I ventured to Utah. I spent 8 days total seeing all 5 national parks and having generally a fantastic time. I would certainly recommend to anyone reading to visit any and all of those places. The thing I would not recommend, however, is to do what I did and go alone. I was gambling with a lot of different dangers in that I traveled by myself and both backpacked and camped by myself in some less than safe places. I was at a very low point in my life and struggling with depression. I felt very little reason to go on or care for. The North Rim is 3 hours and some change from where I was. Somewhere along the route I was messing with my music and managed to screw up my directions in a spot without great service. When I finally got it back, I clicked the first Grand Canyon option that came up, figuring it would choose whatever was closest. That was my big mistake. I went up into the Kaibab forest and passed the turn I needed to take to get to the North Rim without ever knowing it. I came down the road and into the desert once again, passing one small town before hanging a right into the nothingness of the desert before me. I had so much on my mind and had zoned out a bit while driving that I didn't really realize how long I had been on this trip. Eventually it hit me, I should have been to the North Rim by now. It turns out I had gone about 60 miles into the desert before ever realizing my blunder. During this time, I saw less than 5 cars. Miraculously, I had service and got the right route. Thankfully no one was waiting for me or traveling with me, so I didn't consider it such a terrible mistake beyond lost sleep and the price of gas, so I thought, oh well, at least while I'm out here, I might as well have another look at the stars. This is where it began. I pulled off in another one of those shoulders after turning around and getting out. I don't really even remember looking up, because I stepped out into what I can only describe as a presence. I felt a mixture of a lot of things. I felt watched, as though I was being stared at intently and viciously. I felt hated, that is the only way I can describe it. Whatever was staring at me deeply desired to harm me, and I could feel it shooting down my spine just seconds after I stepped out of the car. Never in my life had I ever felt anything like that, and I hope to never again. I will never forget the sensation of getting out of that vehicle. I had an instinctual feeling that I needed to get back in the car as quickly as possible and drive immediately. It was like an alarm in my head repeating over and over, get back in the car right now and drive. Every second I stood out there, it heightened. I wasn't out of the car for more than 20 to 25 seconds, and even that seemed like an eternity. I floored it out of there, expecting to feel better quite quickly. I did not. I now felt another feeling I had never experienced and hoped to never again. I was being chased. Even typing this now, it still seems crazy and unbelievable to me, and I still try to rationalize that I psyched myself out, but I remain steadfast and convinced. I was going upwards of 85 miles per hour, and I would swear on my life that something was behind me even at that speed. Paranoid, I kept tapping the brake lights to see if I could make out anything, but I couldn't. This dreadful feeling persisted until I saw the town I had passed earlier, some 50 miles away from the initial encounter. I didn't feel completely safe again until I was into the Kaibab forest. Now I'm aware this far in the desert there's going to be wildlife around me, but remember I didn't care a whole lot, and I know full well there's not an animal that wants to be near me any more than I want to be near it, so I generally wasn't worried about that. Whatever this was, I firmly believe it was not an animal. I know that UT is a strange part of the country full of strange stories, encounters, and conspiracies involving government cover-ups and experiments, so I'm not sure exactly what to chalk it up to. I did some research after that, and the best I can figure, I may have come across something similar to a skinwalker. I'll also say that I did venture out of the car several more times at night to see the stars while driving through Utah, and not once did I experience anything like this again. While I am a man of faith and I generally don't believe in a lot of urban legends, I do believe there is demonic activity and/or an inexplicable amount of stories and encounters for me to simply say there's nothing to it. I was vaguely aware of some of these legends before my trip but didn't pay a whole lot of attention to them. After the certainty I feel in my own experience and from what I've read, I can say that there is definitely some truth to these that I myself can vouch for. Thanks for listening if you made it to the end of this. Unidentified large dog demon? This is my mother's account of an incident that occurred when she was 16 or 17 years old. She was in Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, when this happened, so 2003-ish. She was on a back road driving home, as her hometown is a pretty small town in the middle of basically nowhere, and she knew the roads like the back of her hand. Keep in mind that this is the experience that makes her have any amount of doubt about there being nothing out there. She was driving up a small hill, and on her way down the hill, she sees a large black dog, in her words, bigger than she'd ever seen. Bigger than a cane corso but about the size of a baby black bear. She stopped to let the animal cross, and she watched it walk into the road, turn to look directly at her, and then continue crossing the road. She watched it walk almost into the woods before driving away, but when she looked back into the woods, it was just gone. Vanished. She said the eyes were glowy or red or something unsettling and that she couldn't draw it because it was too obviously cryptid. I couldn't draw a wolf's fur because it just wasn't a wolf's fur. She also says that it definitely could not have been a bear or a wolf because it was too leggy. She was raised highly religious, and her mom just told her it was a demon, to which my mom basically went cool. And shrugged it off. It was patchy and fluffy at the same time. I can't remember if it had a dog's snout. All I remember is that it looked directly at me, and there was something about its eyes. They were definitely forward-facing. The ghost on the old country road. In 2007, I drove a taxi for a small firm in the north of England. I worked there for around 6 months. I usually did weekends and late shifts because the money was better and roads were less hectic at night. As you'd expect, however, driving around on a Saturday night, I'd see all kinds of crazy. Drunks fighting, people sleeping in the road, people doing the dirty in bus stops, etc., usual drunken behavior. I'd taken dying people to hospitals, intervened in domestic disputes, and had fights with drugged-up customers. Good and bad. You name it. It was never a dull moment, I'll say that much, but, for many reasons, a job I'll never do again. I dropped off a drunk customer one Saturday night sometime after 12 a.m. and was heading back to base when I took a left turn that led me along the old country road. It's a notorious, horrible, twisty, narrow road lined with trees and old stone walls on both sides. It's on a steep hill and has almost no street lights. Every corner is a blind corner, and the camber goes from side to side without warning. During the day it's scary to drive along, at night it's almost suicidal. If it wasn't for the fact that I was trying to get back to base and squeeze another fare in before my shift finished at 2 a.m., I'd have never taken this route. Petitions have been going for decades trying to get this accident hotspot fixed, but the local council either can't afford it or never seems to be interested. Hundreds of accidents have happened there over the decades, many have died, and most people just avoid it altogether despite it being the quickest way from A to B. So I'm cautiously driving along this road just after 12 a.m., no other cars on the road, when I see a young lady with her back towards me walking down the middle of the road. She was a white girl, looked late teen/early 20s, had brown hair, and was wearing a blue flowery dress. As I got closer, I could see that she looked to be in bad shape. Her hair was a mess, she was only wearing one shoe, and I could see that her dress was torn and dirty. She had grazes on her hands, legs, and face, she had leaves in her hair, she was in a right mess. At first, I was just concerned for her safety walking down this road at night and had planned to just slow down and give her a warning about the dangers, but when I saw the state that she was in, I decided to stop and see if she needed help. I pull along with her and ask if she's okay and if she's been hurt or in an accident or something. She looked at me dazed and confused, most likely drunk, so I asked again, and she responded, "I want to go home." I ask her again if she's okay, should I call an ambulance or something, but she isn't responding and just standing there mumbling and confused, so I couldn't just leave her there. I offer her a lift, I get out and open the rear door for her, and I help her into the car. I ask the girl where she wanted to go, and she gives me the address of a residence about 10 minutes drive away. There were rules that prevented us from picking up unsolicited customers, so before moving, I radioed the controller and explained that I'd picked up a drunk straggler needing medical attention and I was taking her home. It got the okay, logged in the book, so off we went. We start driving, and I can see that she's cold, so I turn the heating up. I'm asking her questions like is she hurt, was she in an accident, what happened, etc., but apart from a few mumbles, I can't get any sense out of her. I ask her name, which she says is Rose, but everything else was just barely audible drunken mumbles. She'd said, "I want to go home" a few times, I caught that much, and it looked like she was falling asleep against the window, so I just stopped the questions, let her be, and just drove. We get to the house around 1 a.m., and she's fast asleep against the window. It's a big old colonial-looking house. I think it's been there since the 1700s and was once owned by a local lord or something. I called her name a few times to wake her up but got no response. I didn't want to start manhandling her out of the car, so I got out and went up to the house to get some help with moving her. As I'm walking up the driveway, I can see that there are still lights on in the house, so I knock quietly and wait. After a few seconds, a woman answers the door, she's crying and rubbing her face. She was around 60, I'd guess, with gray hair, wearing a white nightgown. I explain who I am, that I'm a taxi driver, and that I have a girl in the car named Rose who's looking in bad shape and has asked me to bring her here. Before I can finish, however, she turns and walks away and calls out for who I assumed is her husband. A man then comes to the door. He's around the same age, and he's carrying a framed photograph. He had a look of sadness on his face that I couldn't explain at the time, but one that I'd soon know all too well. I explained to him the situation and that I need help with getting her out of the car. He waits for me to finish, and then he shows me the photograph that he's holding and asks, "Is this her?" I confirm it's the girl in my car, and he asks, "Is she still there?" I confirm that she's asleep in the car, and we're probably going to have to carry her back to the house. He puts the photograph down and comes with me to the car. There was a lack of urgency in his behavior, which I found odd considering the situation. We get to the car, I open the rear door, and she's gone. I quickly scan the surroundings, and there's no sign of her. I look at him, panicking slightly at the thought of this girl walking around the area drunk somewhere, but he doesn't seem to be too bothered by her absence. I suggest that we call the police. He declines and asks me to come back to the house. We get back to the house, and he goes inside. I assumed he was going to call somebody or maybe look for his wallet. I hear him talking to his wife about something, then he returns holding a newspaper. He opens the newspaper, points to a page, and asks again, "Is this her?" I look at the page and see a picture of a smiling Rose. I confirm it's her again while my eyes scan the page and see words like accident and old road, but I'm not paying much attention. I'm more worried about finding this girl. He then tells me some of the following, some of which I didn't discover until later that night when I read the article. The article stated that, in 2001, it was Rose's 18th birthday. She'd been at a party with friends and had gotten into an argument, so she decided to leave alone at around midnight. She'd been walking down the old road when a car hit her from behind. The driver, yet to be identified, didn't stop. She died laying in bushes by the side of the road. Her body wasn't found until several days later, after a police search. He told me that every birthday since, around 1 a.m., they've received a knock at the door from a worried driver claiming to have Rose in the car. They'd been sitting up celebrating her birthday and waiting for me to arrive. So, confused by his story, I asked him to show me the photograph again just to be sure that it's the same girl that was in my car, and it was. I didn't know what to say or do. I wanted to laugh, tbh, so I just apologized for the misunderstanding, said goodnight, and went back to my car. I sat thinking for a few minutes, then decided I'd drive around the area and check if I could find her. I couldn't, so after about 30 minutes I gave up and drove back to base. I arrived back at base just before 2 a.m., and the lady controller asks what happened with the injured girl that I'd picked up. I give her a brief rundown of the strange events that had just happened, and she laughs and shouts towards the back room, "Ha! Hey Tony! We've got another one." He's seen her too. A guy called Tony comes out. He'd worked taxis for years, and he tells me about the stories of the ghost on the old country road that taxi drivers in the area share. I kind of laughed and shrugged it off, but internally I was rattled. I left work and went home and read the article about the accident online. Cried my damn eyes out. I didn't get much sleep that night and didn't fancy working the Sunday, so the next morning I call in and take the day off. I went out to the car during the day to see if she'd left anything in the car, and I found a single tree leaf laying on the carpet where she'd been sitting. A few days pass, and I'm unable to get over this weird night. Her pleas if I want to go home were still ringing in my ears, and the leaf was sitting on my coffee table staring at me. So I got up one morning, got in my car, and went back to the road. I drove up and down it a few times, trying to remember exactly what I'd seen that night. After an hour, I leave and park up for a while, then decide I'd go back to the house. I needed to know for sure if the girl that I'd picked up that night was in fact Rose or some other person. I arrived back at the house and park where I'd been that night. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, not sure why I'd driven there, contemplating whether I should knock on the door or not, and if I did, what would I say? As I'm sitting there, I see the man walking down the driveway towards me. He recognizes me, comes up to the car, and I roll down the window. He asks, "We saw you sitting there, is everything all right?" It wasn't. He could tell by the look on my face I was having a hard time accepting any of this. He invited me into his house, so almost without saying a word I get out and follow him inside. I get inside, and a dog comes running up to me, wagging its tail. As I'm giving it a good stroke and saying hello to the dog, the lady from that night appears from a room and welcomes me in. These were really nice, warm people. I follow the man into his living room and accept the offer of a cup of tea from the lady. I sit down and look around and can see pictures of Rose everywhere. Rose as a baby, Rose at school, Rose with friends, family photos. I could barely hold back the tears at this point. We sat and talked about Rose for around an hour. Talked about that night. We talked about the accident. We talked about her birthdays. We talked about her funeral. We talked about the police investigation. The couple, who were her parents, had gone through hell for the past 6 years. Tears were shed. The happy dog sitting at my feet, awaiting strokes, was a welcome distraction for me whenever I felt the tears coming. I had it confirmed that Rose was indeed gone and hadn't just gone missing and was maybe still alive somewhere. We sat and chatted, and I got to the point where I felt it was time for me to leave this grieving couple to their privacy. Before leaving, I asked if it would be okay if I visited her gravestone and paid my respects. They were overjoyed that I'd asked to do so, so they told me the location, and as I was leaving her, her mother remarked, "Oh, take her some hydrangeas, she'll love those." I didn't realize until I got to the flower shop later that hydrangeas were a type of blue flower. The same blue flowers filled the house's front garden, and the same blue flower covered Rose's dress on the night of her 18th birthday. I thanked them for their hospitality and left. I went home, changed clothes, and bought flowers. Seeing the blue hydrangea was a shock. I bought a bouquet and wrote a message on the card. "Dear Rose, I hope you find your way home one day. Love, Rich X." I went and placed the flowers at her gravestone and sat there for the rest of the afternoon. I quit my job the following day. 2 women see humanoids broken down on the side of the road. In late June or July 1972, in Deming, New Mexico, USA, Mrs. Hilda McAfee and her mother, driving in the direction of Las Cruces, were surprised to see a blinding ray of light. Amid the strong light, she observed 2 figures of average height, wearing pale blue overalls. The costume was very large, with wide belts, gloves, and dark boots. On their heads was a case with a dark visor. The humans were not concerned by the presence of women. They were repairing or working under an artifact that emitted a blue light while talking to each other. They seemed rigid in their movements. Patty Morris, a researcher, said the women believed they had hit the artifact with their vehicle as it was in the middle road. They also speculate that the light of the device was used to avoid an accident. The 2 women had burning, sharp pains in the chest and arms after the encounter on the road. Interestingly, the husband of Mrs. McAfee, Mike Rogers, is the brother of one of the witnesses of the famous Travis Walton case. During the course of his investigation of the Walton case, field investigator Raymond Jordan obtained a lead on a possible occupant report in Deming, New Mexico, dating back to 1972. The case was turned over to field investigator Patty Morris, who submitted the following report, which was done to the specification of the witnesses. On a clear but dark summer evening in June or July 1972, exact day and month uncertain, Mrs. Hilda McAfee and her elderly mother were on their way home by car from Las Cruces, New Mexico, to Deming. Interstate 10 was relatively devoid of traffic as they clipped along at about 65 miles per hour, heading west. At about 23 miles east of Deming, the evening was disrupted by a beam of blue light that shone down on them from what seemed to be a short distance straight ahead and emanating from the same lane in which they were driving. The light was huge and blinding, and Mrs. McAfee prepared to swerve around an object on the ground just ahead. As she pulled around the object, the 2 women were within viewing distance of 2 men bathed in the brilliant blue light, but only gathered a quick view of them. They appeared to be of average height and rather stocky. They were clad in pale blue bulky quilted coveralls. Mrs. McAfee's mother noted that they were wearing wide belts, which matched the coveralls and gloves, with no insignias in evidence. Mrs. McAfee said they were wearing dark boots that reached the midcalf. Both agreed that the men were identically dressed and wore helmets similar in appearance to those worn by motorcycle riders, including a visor, dark, which concealed the facial features. The figures appeared rigid and not aware of, or if so, unconcerned about, the presence of the 2 women. One had his back turned to the women and seemed to be working on something connected with the object located above them, while the other was turned sideways, facing him, and appeared to be talking to his companion. Both were standing flat on the pavement, either beside or underneath the presumed object and the blue light that shone down on them from a point somewhere above. At the same time, the beam of light that had been focused on the 2 women was still glaring at them and followed the car as it drove around the men and object. Also noted were black rods estimated to be 4 or 5 inches wide located near the men, but no details were noted. The entire object was described as being obscure, and no sound was heard. The only lights visible were the light from above and the spotlight, and the object was vaguely discerned as about the size of a truck and sitting high off the ground. Mrs. McAfee said she wasn't certain but that they may have passed partially under the object in their attempt to avoid hitting it. After they passed the men and the object, the women looked back, but all was dark and no trace was seen of the tableau. They later speculated that whatever it was, they had used the light to prevent a collision and turned it off after the women had passed it. Mrs. Morris concurred on this point. An odd aspect of this case is the aftermath. Both women suffered a burning, aching pain in their chests and arms after the encounter, and even their bones seemed to hurt. Both ladies thought the pain was caused by the light, which was so brilliant it lit up the floorboards of the car and was much brighter than daylight. Neither of the women had ever had a UFO experience before and were totally unaware of them. Field investigator Morris was very impressed with the sincerity of the two women, who were eager to tell of their experience. Mrs. McAfee is landlady to Mr. Cheney Rogers, who is a brother of Mike Rogers and one of the 6 witnesses to the Travis Walton incident. It was because of the Walton incident that Mrs. McAfee and her mother decided to divulge their experience. Mrs. McAfee decided no one would laugh at them now. Be careful where you drive late at night. This took place back around the fall of 2020, around late October. One night, 3 of my friends Nate, Charles, Jordan, and I decided to meet up at a local park around midnight, just located within my friend Jordan's neighborhood, to have one of our relentless hot boxing smoke sessions. Since this was our senior year of high school and with the pandemic and political animosity going on at the time, like many other kids, we were basically stuck at home for the most part, attending online classes and barely getting out of our houses since most public places were closed. Because of this, we all ended up smoking weed to kill time and basically have a little bit of fun, so having these hotbox sessions wasn't anything new to us since we've been smoking since August of that same year. I recently stopped smoking altogether due to unrelated issues, but I digress. Back to the story. About an hour after our smoke session, the 4 of us reluctantly agreed to start driving out of the park and around town for a while, with my friend Jordan being the driver, Nate in the front passenger seat, and Charles and I in the back. Stupid, I know. 20 minutes into our drive, being the intoxicated idiots that we were, having the windows cracked, we decided to put on Dead Space ambience music just for shits and giggles as we were making our way out of a residential area and onto a 2-way main road that led out into the rural part of town. To give you an idea of the scenery, we were driving through one of those semi-rural suburban neighborhoods you'd find out in the middle of nowhere. For those of you who live in the rural South or the Midwest, you'll know what I'm talking about. Since it was completely pitch black and we were practically in the middle of nowhere bumping creepy ambient music while approaching a dimly lit intersection, it began to give off an eerie liminal vibe that was kind of fitting for the season. As we approached the intersection, my mind began to green out and race about the unknown beyond the darkness that enshrined our surroundings. Hey, it'd be really ducking terrifying if we came across a humanoid like the Wendigo or something, I said to myself. At that point we had reached the intersection, and since I was looking to my left, I immediately noticed a figure emerging out of the pitch black. As the figure got under the streetlight, I realized that what I was looking at was a woman in pigtails dressed in a really classy, clean outfit with a tan blouse and high heels. I instinctively sobered up and took this as a bad sign from all the stories I've heard and just knew something was wrong, because who the hell would be out at 1 a.m. in a classy outfit out in the middle of nowhere? In a matter of seconds, my worst fear came to life as this woman began to approach the car, and I really didn't want any of us taking any chances with this woman. I started to freak out and told my buddy, Jordan, there's a woman coming at us. Turn the car now. Our friend Nate noticed a second figure dressed in all black slowly emerge from the rear end of the car just about 15 feet away by our right side, carefully approaching. This only instilled more fear in all of us about the situation that was happening before us. Charles instantly caught on to what we were seeing as this woman practically began running at us screaming, "Hey, help me, please. Stop." Charles then began aggressively slapping Jordan's shoulder in a panic, shouting at my friend. Jordan buddy turns the ducking car. Jordan, still zooted of the weed, was confused for a split second before he saw that this woman and the man in black were mere feet from the car. In panic, he yelled, "Ah shit. Nah bro," as he peeled the car to the right and in the opposite direction from where this woman and man came running from. We all sobbed up a bit, being creeped out and confused as to what just happened, but laughed it off because of how intoxicated we all still were. Needless to say, we still question why the woman was running at us screaming and what the intentions were from the man dressed in all black behind the car. My morbid curiosity gets the better of me sometimes, and I'd like some theories as to what could have happened to all 4 of us during that night. It was a mind-blowing encounter for the witnesses, I'm sure. Location, Toquila Valley, Columbia. Date, January 9, 1990. Time, late night. Deontologist Ivan Naranjo and 2 passengers were traversing a lonely valley when their vehicle, a Nissan Jeep, began to experience engine trouble. The vehicle soon ground to a halt by the roadside as its electrical system went dead. Stranded in the middle of the Andean foothills, Naranjo was doing his best to get the vehicle in motion again when one of the passengers gasped involuntarily at what was taking place in the night sky. On the horizon, headed their way, was an amazing interplay of red, green, and yellow lights, which did not correspond to any atmospheric phenomenon they could identify. They watched in sheer astonishment as the array of colors lit the sky and grew closer, increasing in size as it closed the intervening distance. Within seconds, a huge disc-shaped device was hovering unsteadily in the blackness over their heads. The object was out of control, and to their horror, about to crash land right on top of them. Naranjo and his passengers found themselves paralyzed by what he characterized as muscular sluggishness. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, another massive disc-shaped craft appeared. Gliding into a space immediately above the dangerously wobbling craft, it fired a dense beam of white light at the vessel, stabilizing its erratic motion right away. The surreal event became even more so as two humanoids emerged from the larger craft to ostensibly perform repairs on the now stabilized saucer. Soon the repaired saucer began spinning furiously on its axis, vanishing in a thick fog. The rescue ship vanished amid a powerful whirlwind that stripped earth, rocks, and dust from the surface below. Exhausted by the ordeal, the shocked witnesses spent a night of fitful sleep in the wilderness. In the morning they were stunned to see a landscape that gave the appearance of having been blasted by divine fire. Water ponds adjacent to the highway had been turned into grim puddles of mud, and the carcasses of small desert rats and lizards littered the landscape, roasted by some form of radiation. One of the passengers would later die of an unknown malady, possibly related to the strange energies released by the alien vehicles over the valley. Desert camping almost gone wrong. So let me start by saying that my brother and I are extremely experienced desert campers, and we have lived near deserts pretty much our whole lives. I have never in my 20 years of life ever for 1 second believed in anything paranormal or anything to do with evil spirits, unlike my brother, who has always sensed presenses and been able to see mostly what we call jinn, also known as demons, until last night, which is safe to say marks the last time we will be camping alone in the desert. We always have the same place we like to go when we want to camp with minimum effort, and our day started as normal as ever, but as we got closer and closer to our destination, I saw my brother's mood completely shift, and when I asked what was wrong, he just shrugged me off and told me to just keep driving. When we arrived, I felt completely fine, but my brother was still unusually quiet. It was around 1 p.m. at that point, and we were planning on leaving at around 12 to 1 a.m. Because of the heat, we made the terrible decision to set up under a few trees and a source of water, which in Middle Eastern culture is where the jinns live at night. Not that I believed that at the time, of course. However, we still set up our camp and continued on as normal. Now my brother always says that when he feels a presence, or several in this case, we first dug them out without any issues, but as we pushed them out of the sand, they got stuck again. If you know anything about dune bashing or desert camping, then you understand the physics behind how wheels get stuck in sand, and the way this Nissan was stuck was incredibly unusual. It was literally stuck somewhere with plenty of space available for grip, and later in my brother said that as we were digging them out of the sand, that's when he really started feeling an evil presence around us but didn't want to say anything as to not ruin the trip and freak me out, so we ended up having to tow them out of the sand, which again was far harder than it had to be. First, our tow strap broke off of their bumper. The tow strap cost $200 and was fine, but their bumper was slightly damaged. Then we almost got stuck ourselves, and a 20-minute job took more like 90 minutes, which again was extremely unusual and, with hindsight, just the beginning of all the crap to come. When we came back to our camp, we noticed how everything around us had gotten unusually quiet. The area we were in has hundreds of birds around, and as far as we have seen, 3 cats who sometimes pay us a visit, but there wasn't a single noise at all other than our fire, which was dying out unusually quickly. It had gotten dark quickly, so we had scrambled to build a fire to cook our dinner before we were asked to help the couple, and I had noticed the silence, but it didn't bother me. However, my brother suddenly grabbed my hand as we were sitting down to eat and said with clear fear in his voice that we should go as quickly as possible and that he didn't feel safe. To ease both our minds, we prayed. We are Christians, so of course we thought it would help us, but I believe it accelerated everything that happened and just made whatever was there with us angry. We quickly finished our dinner, and me being the skeptic, I was completely fine and pretty much just humoring my brother, but I started getting the nagging feeling that it was time to pack up and leave. It hit me like a wave, and I was quite taken aback by the feeling, so I voiced it to my brother, and he agreed that we should pack up right away and leave. We started packing up, at a normal pace, like we were just tired and wanted to leave, and when we heard a sound very close to us, on the opposite side of the pond, which wasn't that big, that I could only describe as the sound of death itself, and it seemed to go on for several minutes, and when I say that we looked at each other in absolute fear, I genuinely mean I was ready to have a heart attack right there and then. At that point, after being fortson for a few minutes and quite reasonably so after hearing that bellowing screech so close to us, we turned on the car, drove it back so we could see better with the headlamps, and just started throwing everything into the car without much care but with a whole lot of urgency, and it was like after the screaming that's when shit really hit the fan. First it was the sound of twigs snapping and footsteps all around us, then it was the shadows behind the trees, and I tried everything to try and get those shadows to change shape, walking around the trees and moving the lights, but nothing. It looked like there were people just staring at us the whole time, and you could really feel it too. We really felt like we weren't alone and that we weren't with friendly entities either. We also noticed that all 3 cats were huddled right behind our car, away from the trees, so they were not the ones snapping twigs, but literally did not care if they were not going to move. I was still getting out of there. Thankfully they left when we started reversing, but they too looked absolutely terrified and were just starting at the trees too. It also felt like whatever was there was getting closer, and I have never felt anything like it. It was a gut feeling, and you just know it's one of those natural instincts you should not ignore. Thankfully we were able to pack up quickly. Our tent was very close to the trees though, so that was a nerve-wracking experience, and whilst we are packing, it is still very silent. It's very normal for the birds around that area to continue making sounds until 2 or 3 a.m., and at this point it was about 8 p.m., so it was highly unusual. I personally think I was most terrifying as I was driving away back onto the main dirt path to leave the desert. I know cars very well, I know how they drive in the sand, and I know our car especially well because we've had it for so long, and I could instantly tell that the steering was off and completely fighting against me, which fixed itself the second we were on the highway. The sound of twigs snapping was still all around us, and it was loud enough to be heard over the sounds of the car, and on the path was what seemed like every bird that was in the area, just standing there and staring at us until we got close enough to force them to walk, not even fly, away. At one point my brother just grabbed my shoulder and told me very sternly to just keep looking in front of me and under no circumstances to look through his window. It was the tone of his voice that told me to listen to him for the love of God. We were in a part of the desert where we had to pretty much drive through the whole of the accessible areas to get onto the highway, and there wasn't a single person around us. The only thing we saw was a very clearly abandoned Toyota Hilux positioned behind a small dune and hidden by the trees, but it was far enough from our campsite to easily be ruled out as the source of the original screech. The worst thing I saw was as we were closing to the exit. Now we know these deserts very well. We've both grown up here and have been riding dirt bikes and quad bikes in these deserts since we moved here, and we know what wildlife to expect: cats, birds, spiders, goats, camels, mice, foxes, maybe even the occasional Scorpio, or if you are really unlucky, a snake, but that is it. There is nothing else in these deserts. We witnessed standing in the middle of the path, staring directly at us, a deer, a goddamn deer. I've only ever seen one deer in 16 years of living here, and that was in someone's garden as a pet. It's safe to say I was in complete shock, and the deer was just not moving at all until I got close enough that we could practically smell the thing before it slowly walked off the path while looking right at us. We quickly moved past the deer, and again my brother, with a gasp and then very sternly, said to keep my eyes right in the road. I asked him as we got on the highway what it was that he kept seeing, and he very reluctantly told me he kept seeing large figures around us anytime we went through a bend, and they were all either pointing right at us or ahead of us. I'm very glad he didn't tell me at the time because I would have been shitting myself. We still were yet to encounter anyone, but we still very clearly heard sounds all around us, and again, not the usual bird or cat but very definitely big and unrelenting. When I saw the exit, I was as happy as I have ever been, but that quickly faded when once again we saw another deer standing right in the middle of the road, slowly waking away and looking right at us, except this time it didn't really look like a deer, more like a kangaroo mixed with a deer, and its eyes were milky and it looked rotten and horrible, but I didn't much care. I just stepped on the gas, and fortunately it had gotten out of the way in time. Now when you exit the desert, you can either turn right onto a long stretch of highway or you can go left and go through a small town, then take the back streets to a parallel highway, and as I was about to turn right, my brother once again, with that same tone of voice, said to go to the town and go to the right. Later he once again said he saw a line of figures pointing ahead of us, so if we had gone that way, we wouldn't have made it home in one piece. Thankfully, as we made it farther and farther away and close to our home, the gut feeling of being watched was going away, and of course, having never experienced something like this before, I was distraught and wanted to talk about it. My brother told me as we were going home that because we were alone, the jinn wanted to mess with us, that they wanted to scare us and most likely cause us harm, and that the way they get to you in such rural places is to force you to stop and then do whatever they want, which makes sense as to why there were so many animals on our path. He also said that they cause bad luck, and he could feel them the second we entered the desert, which explains his clumsiness all day and the car that got stuck in such an unusual manner. This is also my younger brother, by 3 years, and naturally, any time he ever told me about this sort of thing, I always just dismissed it as him scaring himself. I can excuse the sounds we heard and shadows we saw last night. I can excuse the gut feeling of just being scared, but I cannot excuse the 2 deer we saw staring right at us, and I cannot excuse the car just randomly fighting against me as I was driving. The deer completely freaked me out, as did the tone of my brother's voice. I'm also sorry if this is written sporadically. I'm still shaken up and trying to make sense of everything, and it's safe to say we are not going camping there again, and it's safe to say I'm never dismissing my brother when it comes to this kind of thing again, and God am I so thankful that we made it home safely. I also forgot to mention that as we were setting up our tent, it was fighting us. We would secure one end of it into the ground and instantly another end would pop out, and after we finally managed to get it set up, it looked as if something was pushing it in, and it collapsed once before we got it back up, and again, it looked like something was pushing on it, which is something neither of us have ever experienced before, and we have set up tents in the middle of a sandstorm before.